A decorated ex-soldier named Marcus Cruz attends a basketball game in a quiet town to relax and enjoy civilian life. However, a rowdy biker gang, notorious for their reckless and disruptive behavior, starts causing trouble in the stands. When Marcus steps in to defend a young fan and his father from their harassment, tensions escalate rapidly. The bikers have no idea they've just picked a fight with someone trained to handle far worse. Marcus Cruz was a man trying to live a quiet life. After years of serving his country in some of the most dangerous places on earth, he had finally returned home to find peace. But peace, he discovered, was not something easily found. Not when the echoes of battle still haunted his dreams, and certainly not in the small, rowdy town of Clearfield. Clearfield was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and where any event, even a local basketball game, drew crowds like moths to a flame. Marcus, however, was happy to remain in the background. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his military training evident in his precise movements and upright posture, but his face was one of quiet calm. He preferred to sit unnoticed in the upper bleachers, taking in the games as a way to unwind. It was his way of reconnecting with civilian life, even if the transition was slow. On this particular Friday night, the Clearfield Thunder was facing off against a rival team from a neighboring town. The gymnasium was packed, the air buzzing with excitement. Families filled the stands, kids ran up and down the aisles, and the smell of popcorn and nachos lingered in the air. Marcus watched it all with a faint smile, his mind far from the chaos of his former life. For a brief moment, the shouts of the crowd and the squeak of sneakers on polished wood made him forget the tension that usually sat heavy on his shoulders. It was during the second quarter when he first noticed them, the Iron Vultures. A group of leather-clad bikers swaggered into the gym like they owned the place, their presence sucking the energy out of the room. People instinctively leaned away as they passed, parents pulling their children closer. Marcus recognized their type immediately. They weren't there for the game. They were there to remind everyone who held the power in Clearfield. He had seen their kind before, in combat zones where bullies thrived in the absence of accountability. The leader of the group, a burly man with a beard like a grizzly bear, barked orders to his companions as they claimed an entire section of seats near the middle of the gym. His name, Marcus would later learn, was Brock. For now, Marcus simply observed, his instincts sharpening. The bikers were loud, obnoxious, and clearly looking to provoke someone. Their laughter was a grating sound that seemed to mock the very idea of decency. By halftime, their antics had escalated. They hollered insults at the rival team, threw popcorn at the referee, and loudly mocked the cheerleaders. Most people tried to ignore them, but their boisterous laughter and crude jokes made it impossible to focus on the game. Marcus remained in his seat, his jaw tightening as he saw the unease spreading through the crowd. He hated seeing bullies take over a space meant for joy and unity, but he kept his silence for now. Intervention was a calculated act, and Marcus knew when to wait. Things took a turn when one of the bikers, a wiry, tattooed man, spotted a boy sitting a few rows down with his father. The boy, no older than 8, was wearing a bright red thunder cap and clutching a foam finger. The biker snatched the boy's cap and dangled it out of reach, laughing as the child's face crumpled in confusion. "Hey, give that back," the father demanded, standing up. But the bikers only laughed harder, their laughter loud and cruel. Marcus stood before he even realized what he was doing. His training kicked in, his movements fluid and purposeful. He descended the bleachers, weaving through the crowd with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced far worse than a group of bullies. By the time he reached the father and son, the tension in the gym was palpable. "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. The biker holding the cap turned, his smirk fading as he took in Marcus's imposing figure. "And who are you supposed to be?" the biker sneered, his bravado faltering. "Someone you don't want to mess with," Marcus replied. His tone wasn't threatening, but there was an edge to it, a weight that suggested he wasn't bluffing. "Give the boy his hat." For a moment it seemed like the biker might resist, But then he glanced at Marcus's steely eyes and thought better of it. Grumbling, he tossed the cap back to the boy who clutched it tightly. The gym erupted in whispers as Marcus turned to the father. "You okay?" he asked. The man nodded, his gratitude evident in his expression. "Thank you." Marcus gave a small nod and returned to his seat, the encounter over as quickly as it had begun. But the Iron Vultures weren't done with him. As he walked away, Brock leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This ain't over," he muttered. Marcus heard him but didn't respond. He had dealt with men like Brock before, men who mistook fear for respect and thought power was something you took, not earned. As he settled back into his seat, Marcus's mind was already running through scenarios. He hadn't wanted trouble, but trouble had found him. And if there was one thing Marcus Cruz knew, it was how to handle trouble. Marcus Cruz had learned to trust his instincts. They were honed in the unforgiving environments of war zones, where ignoring a hunch could mean life or death. So when he stepped out of the gymnasium into the cool night air, his senses remained on high alert. The encounter with the Iron Vultures during the game was over, but the way they had stared him down before leaving made it clear. This was far from finished. The parking lot was quiet except for the distant murmur of departing fans and the occasional rev of a car engine. Marcus scanned his surroundings with casual precision, noting the groups of people trickling away in clusters. He had parked his truck in the far corner of the lot where the streetlights barely reached, a habit born of always preparing for the worst. As he walked, he caught sight of movement from the corner of his eye. 3 bikers loitered near a row of motorcycles, their silhouettes cast in sharp relief by the glow of a nearby street lamp. They weren't speaking, but their body language screamed of tension. Marcus didn't slow his pace or change direction. Drawing attention to his awareness could spark confrontation, and he wasn't interested in escalating things unnecessarily. Still, his mind churned through possibilities. The Iron Vultures were no ordinary troublemakers. Their reputation in Clearfield was well known. Extortion, intimidation, and the occasional act of vandalism. They had managed to skate under the radar of law enforcement, mostly by targeting those too scared to report them. The thought that they might turn their attention to him, or worse, the other spectators from the game, left a sour taste in his mouth. As he approached his truck, a low whistle cut through the quiet. Marcus paused, his hand instinctively brushing the truck's handle. The whistle came again, this time followed by a voice. "Hey, soldier boy." Marcus turned slowly, his eyes landing on the 3 bikers. One of them, a wiry man with a skull tattoo creeping up his neck, grinned as he stepped forward. Behind him, the other 2 spread out slightly, their posture aggressive. "Got a minute to chat?" the tattooed man said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. He held up his hands, palms outward, as if to signal he meant no harm. Marcus didn't buy it for a second. "Not interested," Marcus replied, his tone neutral. He opened the truck door, but the tattooed man moved closer. "Ah, come on," the man said, his grin widening. "We just want to talk. Right, boys?" The other bikers chuckled, their laughter low and menacing. Marcus sighed and turned to face them fully, his expression unreadable. He could feel the tension radiating off the men, their need to reassert control after being publicly humiliated earlier. "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away," Marcus said evenly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made the laughter die in their throats. "Don't waste it." The tattooed man's grin faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered, his bravado returning. "You think you're real tough, huh? Just because you played hero back in there?" Marcus didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence was enough to unnerve them, and he could see it in the way their hands fidgeted and their eyes darted to each other. But fear was a double-edged sword. It could make people back down, or lash out. Sure enough, the tattooed man lunged, his fist aimed at Marcus's face. Marcus moved with the precision of a trained fighter, sidestepping the punch and grabbing the man's wrist. He twisted sharply, forcing the man to his knees with a cry of pain. Before the other two bikers could react, Marcus shifted his weight, delivering a swift kick to one man's stomach and an elbow strike to the other's jaw. The entire confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds. By the time it was over, the tattooed man was gasping on the ground, clutching his wrist while his companions groaned in pain nearby. Marcus stood over them, his expression calm but his eyes cold. "I warned you," he said simply. He stepped back, giving them space to retreat, but his body remained ready for another attack. The bikers scrambled to their feet, their earlier bravado completely shattered. The tattooed man glared at Marcus, his face twisted in anger and humiliation. "This isn't over," he spat before limping toward his motorcycle. Marcus watched them go, their engines roaring as they sped out of the parking lot. Only when they were out of sight did he allow himself to relax. He climbed into his truck, his thoughts already racing ahead. The Iron Vultures weren't the type to let a slight go unanswered. Tonight had been a warning, but Marcus knew the real trouble was still to come. As he drove home, Marcus replayed the encounter in his mind. He hadn't gone looking for a fight, but avoiding one entirely hadn't been an option. Now he had a choice to make: continue living his quiet life and hope the gang moved on, or take a stand before they could hurt anyone else. The soldier in him knew which choice was right, but the man who had fought so hard to leave that life behind hesitated. When he pulled into his driveway, the night was still and quiet, but as Marcus stepped out of the truck, he felt the weight of the Iron Vulture's gaze lingering in the darkness. He didn't know when or how they would strike next, but one thing was certain: they would. And when they did, Marcus would be ready. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of peace. He stood on the porch of his modest home, staring out into the night. The stars above were clear and bright, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing below. Marcus took a deep breath, grounding himself in the stillness. Trouble was brewing in Clearfield, and Marcus Cruz was caught in the eye of the storm. Marcus Cruz woke to the sound of gravel crunching under heavy tires. For a moment, his body tensed, instincts sharpened by years of military service. Then he remembered where he was: home. Not a battlefield, not an outpost under siege, just his quiet house on the outskirts of Clearfield. Or, at least, it had been quiet until now. He rose quickly, pulling on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt before moving to the window. Outside, the early morning light was just beginning to stretch across the horizon, illuminating the source of the disturbance. A line of motorcycles, their chrome glinting in the dawn, rumbled to a stop at the edge of his driveway. The Iron Vultures had come calling. There were 6 of them this time, more than the trio from the previous night. Marcus's eyes immediately found Brock, the gang's leader, standing at the forefront with his arms crossed over his massive chest. The rest of the bikers dismounted, their movements deliberate as they spread out around the driveway. It was a show of force, a calculated attempt to intimidate. Marcus sighed. He had expected retaliation, but not this soon. Grabbing his boots and sliding them on, he stepped outside, his posture relaxed but his senses alert. The bikers turned to him as one, their expressions ranging from smug to hostile. "Morning," Marcus said, his tone neutral as he closed the door behind him. He leaned casually against the porch railing, his sharp eyes scanning the group. "What brings you boys out so early?" Brock took a step forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. "We got unfinished business," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "Thought we'd settle it man to man." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "This many men for one conversation? Seems like overkill." A few of the bikers chuckled, but the sound quickly died under Brock's glare. Marcus didn't miss the tension in the air, the way their hands hovered near their belts, the way their eyes darted to him and then away. They weren't just here to talk. "Last night you made us look bad," Brock continued, taking another step closer. "In front of the whole damn town. Now, I can't let that slide. Respect's everything, and you—" He jabbed a finger toward Marcus. "You took it from us." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. Respect isn't something you take. It's something you earn, and terrorizing a kid for his hat isn't the way to do it. Brock's jaw tightened, his nostrils flaring. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone standing alone. "You think you're better than us?" he snarled. "You don't know who you're messing with." Marcus sighed again, his patience wearing thin. "I'm not looking for trouble, Brock, but if you keep pushing, you're going to find it." That was all the invitation Brock needed. With a guttural yell, he lunged forward, swinging a heavy fist. Marcus moved instinctively, sidestepping the blow and delivering a swift strike to Brock's ribs. The bigger man stumbled but recovered quickly, his face twisting with rage. The other bikers sprang into action, rushing toward Marcus as Brock barked orders. Marcus didn't hesitate. His training took over, each movement precise and efficient. He ducked under a wild swing, grabbing the attacker's arm and twisting it behind his back before shoving him into another biker. A third lunged at him with a chain, but Marcus sidestepped and swept his legs out from under him. The fight was over in less than a minute. The bikers lay scattered across the driveway, groaning and clutching their injuries. Marcus stood in the center of the chaos, his breathing steady, his expression unreadable. Brock was the last to rise, his movements slow and deliberate. He wiped blood from the corner of his mouth, his eyes blazing with fury. "This ain't over," Brock spat, echoing his words from the night before. Marcus shook his head, his voice calm but firm. "It's over when you decide to walk away. Otherwise, you're just going to keep losing." Brock glared at him for a long moment before turning to his men. "Let's go," he barked. One by one, the bikers limped to their bikes, their bravado shattered. The sound of engines filled the air as they roared away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the driveway. He stayed there for a while, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from his veins. The morning sun had fully risen by the time he turned and went back inside. He knew this wasn't the end. Brock's pride wouldn't allow it, but Marcus wasn't afraid. He had faced far worse than a gang of bikers. Still, as he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this conflict was bigger than him. The Iron Vultures weren't just a nuisance, they were a threat to the entire community, and if they wouldn't back down, Marcus would have to find a way to stop them, for good. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of calm. He sipped his coffee and stared out the window, watching as the light spread across the quiet town. Trouble was brewing, but Marcus Cruz wasn't the type to back down. The morning after the confrontation lingered in Marcus Cruz's mind. It wasn't just the fight, it was the unspoken threat hanging in the air as Brock and his gang rode away. The Iron Vultures weren't known for letting things go, and Marcus doubted they would break that habit now. As he stepped out onto his porch, the crisp air carried the faint smell of rain, a reminder of the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, both literal and figurative. Marcus had spent his career preparing for situations just like this, volatile, unpredictable, and simmering with the potential for violence. He wasn't afraid of what might come, but he wasn't reckless either. Preparation was key, and Marcus approached it with the same discipline that had kept him alive in combat. He started his day by walking the perimeter of his property, assessing weak points and noting areas that could be reinforced. His house sat on a modest plot of land, surrounded by a mixture of trees and open fields. The driveway was long and winding, a natural bottleneck that could work to his advantage if things escalated. By the time he finished, the sun was high in the sky, and the hum of a distant motorcycle broke the silence. Marcus turned toward the sound, his muscles tensing. A lone biker appeared at the edge of the driveway, the glint of sunlight off the chrome unmistakable. The rider slowed as they approached, stopping just short of the house. Marcus recognized him immediately. It was one of Brock's lieutenants, a wiry man with a perpetual scowl named Royce. Royce didn't dismount. He stayed seated on his bike, one foot planted on the ground for balance, his eyes locked on Marcus. For a moment, neither man spoke. Marcus crossed his arms, his expression unreadable, and waited for Royce to make the first move. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," Royce said finally, his voice carrying over the low rumble of the bike's engine. "But guts'll only get you so far." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Royce smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "It means you're playing a dangerous game, soldier. Brock doesn't take kindly to being shown up, especially not in front of the boys." "Then maybe he should rethink his choices," Marcus replied evenly. "I didn't go looking for a fight. He did." Royce shook his head as if disappointed by the response. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about a fight. It's about respect. You made him look weak, and now he has to set things right. That's how it works." Marcus stepped forward, his gaze never wavering. "Let me make something clear. I'm not interested in your games, your rules, or your version of respect. Tell Brock if he wants to come at me, he'd better be ready to finish what he starts." Royce's smirk disappeared, replaced by a thin line of displeasure. He revved the engine, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. "You've been warned," he said before turning the bike around and speeding off down the driveway. Marcus watched him go, the rumble of the motorcycle fading into the distance. He took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline dissipate. Royce's words confirmed what Marcus already knew. The Iron Vultures weren't going to back down. If anything, they were escalating. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, though Marcus remained on edge. He spent hours in his garage going through old supplies and equipment he hadn't touched since leaving the military. A few tools and makeshift defenses wouldn't stop the Iron Vultures if they came in force, but they might buy him enough time to handle the situation on his terms. By nightfall, Marcus had fortified the house as best he could. Extra locks on the doors, reinforced windows, and a few carefully placed surprises for anyone foolish enough to try breaking in. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him peace of mind as he settled in for the evening. He was halfway through a late dinner when the first sound reached him. A distant roar of engines, faint but growing louder. Marcus set his fork down and stood, his senses immediately on high alert. He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The long driveway stretched out like a shadowy corridor, and at the far end he could see the glow of headlights. The Iron Vultures were coming. Marcus didn't panic. Instead, he moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had been here before. He shut off the lights inside the house, plunging the interior into darkness, and retrieved the small duffel bag he had prepared earlier. Inside were a flashlight, a first aid kit, and a few other essentials. He didn't intend to run, but preparation never hurt. The sound of engines grew deafening as the gang rolled up the driveway. Marcus counted at least 8 bikes, their riders silhouetted against the headlights. They stopped just short of the house, their engines idling like a pack of growling wolves. Brock dismounted first, his massive frame casting a long shadow. He stepped forward, flanked by Royce and another man Marcus didn't recognize. The rest of the gang stayed near their bikes, their postures tense and ready for a fight. "Cruz!" Brock bellowed, his voice cutting through the night like a whip. "Come out here and face me." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He took a moment to steady his breathing, his mind racing through possible scenarios. Finally, he stepped out onto the porch, his movements slow and deliberate. The bikers turned to him as one, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You don't give up, do you?" Marcus said, his voice calm but laced with steel. Brock sneered. "I told you this wasn't over. You had your chance to walk away, but now it's too late." "Too late for what?" Marcus asked, his tone almost curious. "Too late to save yourself," Brock growled. He took another step forward, his hands curling into fists. "We're going to make an example out of you. Show everyone in this town what happens when you mess with the Vultures." Marcus met his gaze unflinching. "You're making a mistake, Brock. Walk away while you still can." For a moment, the two men stared each other down, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Then Brock laughed, a deep, menacing sound that sent a chill through the air. "We'll see who made the mistake," he said. As the gang began to move in, Marcus's mind sharpened. The warning had been ignored. Now it was time to act. Marcus Cruz knew the Iron Vultures wouldn't just leave things unresolved. He had seen their kind before, men who operated on ego and dominance who couldn't walk away without trying to reassert control. It wasn't a matter of if they would strike again, but when. That certainty loomed over him as he went about his day, preparing for whatever might come next. The town of Clearfield, though quaint, wasn't blind to the reputation of the Vultures. Marcus noticed the shift in the townsfolk's demeanor when he ventured into the local diner for lunch. Conversations hushed as he entered, and cautious glances followed him to his booth. Word had spread about his confrontation with Brock and the gang, and while some seemed impressed, others looked downright worried. "Hey there, Marcus," came a voice as he settled into his seat. It was Evelyn, the diner's owner and a longtime resident of Clearfield. She placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of him without asking, her brow furrowed with concern. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low. "Heard you had a run-in with the Vultures." Marcus gave her a small smile. "I'm fine, Evelyn, just a little misunderstanding." She snorted, her hands finding her hips. "Misunderstanding, my foot. Those boys don't know the meaning of the word. You watch yourself, Marcus. They don't take kindly to being shown up." "I'll be careful," he promised, though he could see the worry lingering in her eyes. After finishing his meal, Marcus decided to take the long way home, his instincts urging him to remain cautious. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the winding roads that led to his property. The quiet hum of his truck's engine was the only sound, and for a moment he allowed himself to relax. But then he saw it, a glint of metal in his rearview mirror, followed by the unmistakable roar of motorcycles. His heart rate quickened as he counted at least 5 bikes gaining on him. The Vultures were here. Marcus kept his expression calm, though his mind raced. He eased off the gas, letting the truck slow as the bikes closed the distance. His truck wasn't built for speed, and he had no intention of trying to outrun them. Instead, he focused on controlling the situation. The gang surrounded him within moments, their bikes forming a tight formation around his truck. Brock was at the lead, his face set in a smug grin as he signaled for Marcus to pull over. Marcus complied, guiding the truck onto the shoulder of the road and killing the engine. He stepped out slowly, his movements deliberate, and stood by the open door of the truck. The bikers dismounted, their boots crunching against the gravel as they spread out. Brock approached, his hands resting casually on his belt, but there was nothing casual about the tension in his posture. "Evening, Cruz," Brock said, his tone almost friendly. "Nice night for a drive, isn't it?" "Something I can help you with?" Marcus replied, his voice calm. "Yeah," Brock said, his grin widening. "You can apologize for making me look bad. Maybe beg a little. Show some respect." Marcus's eyes swept over the group. They were armed, not with guns but with chains, crowbars, and knives. It was an ambush, plain and simple. "I'm not apologizing for standing up to bullies," Marcus said. His tone was steady, but his body was tense, ready for the inevitable. "If you're looking for a fight, let's get it over with." Brock's grin faltered, replaced by a scowl. "You think you're tough, huh? Let's see how tough you are when it's 6 against 1. With that, Brock lunged and the rest of the gang followed. Marcus moved like lightning, his military training taking over. He sidestepped Brock's initial charge, driving an elbow into his ribs and sending him staggering. Another biker swung a chain at him, but Marcus caught it midair, yanking the man forward and delivering a sharp knee to his stomach. The fight was chaotic, but Marcus thrived in chaos. He used their numbers against them, positioning himself so they couldn't all attack at once. A crowbar-wielding biker rushed him, but Marcus dodged the swing and countered with a precise strike to the man's jaw. Another tried to grab him from behind, but Marcus spun, slamming his attacker into the side of the truck. One by one, the bikers fell. Brock, realizing the tide had turned, tried to rally his men, but they were too disorganized, too untrained to match Marcus's skill. Within minutes, the gang lay scattered around the road, groaning in pain. Brock was the last one standing, his chest heaving as he stared at Marcus with a mixture of fury and fear. "You think this is over?" he spat, blood trickling from his split lip. "It's over when you decide it is," Marcus said. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the warning in his tone. "Walk away, Brock. Take your men and go." For a moment it seemed like Brock might argue, but then he looked around at his defeated crew and the cold resolve in Marcus's eyes. He turned away with a curse, limping toward his bike. One by one, the vultures followed, their heads low as they mounted their bikes and roared off into the night. Marcus watched them go, his heart still pounding from the fight. He knew this wouldn't be the end. Brock's pride wouldn't let him walk away for good. But for now, Marcus had won. He climbed back into his truck, his hands steady on the wheel, and drove home in silence. As the night enveloped him, Marcus couldn't help but wonder how far Brock would go to reclaim his lost respect. The thought lingered as he pulled into his driveway and stepped inside, locking the door behind him. Trouble was far from over, but Marcus was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the ambush weighed heavily on Marcus Cruz. He had won the fight, but the confrontation only confirmed what he already knew. Brock and the Iron Vultures weren't going to back down. If anything, their bruised egos would drive them to escalate further. The question wasn't whether they would return, but how soon and with how much force. As the days passed, Marcus noticed the subtle signs of their presence lingering in Clearfield. Groups of bikers loitered at the gas station or outside the diner, their laughter too loud, their eyes scanning the streets like predators hunting for prey. The townsfolk avoided them as much as possible, but the tension was palpable. Fear had settled over the town like a heavy fog. Determined to understand his enemy better, Marcus decided it was time to dig deeper. He couldn't afford to wait for the vultures to make the next move. Instead, he needed to anticipate their actions and find a way to stop them before they caused real harm. His first step was gathering information. Marcus had spent enough time in Clearfield to know who to talk to. The town wasn't large, and people had a way of keeping track of each other's business. If the vultures had a history here, someone would know about it. Marcus's first stop was the local hardware store, run by an older man named Frank. Frank had lived in Clearfield his entire life, and if anyone knew the vulture's history, it would be him. As Marcus entered the store, the familiar jingle of the bell above the door greeted him, followed by Frank's warm but weary smile. "Marcus," Frank said, his voice tinged with surprise. "Good to see you. What brings you in?" Marcus returned the smile. "Hey, Frank, I was hoping you might be able to help me with something." "Sure thing," Frank replied, leaning against the counter. "What's on your mind?" "I need to know more about the Iron Vultures," Marcus said, keeping his tone casual. "How long have they been around? Where do they operate from?" Frank's expression darkened and he let out a heavy sigh. "Those boys have been a thorn in this town's side for years," he said. "Used to be a smaller group back when Brock's father was in charge. They mostly kept to themselves, running their little club out of an old warehouse on the edge of town. But when Brock took over, things changed. They got more aggressive, started pushing people around, making demands." Marcus nodded, absorbing the information. "And the warehouse? They still using it?" "As far as I know," Frank said, "they've turned it into their clubhouse. It's where they hold their meetings, throw their parties, that sort of thing. But I wouldn't recommend going near it. Those boys don't take kindly to uninvited guests." "Thanks, Frank," Marcus said, his mind already working. "I appreciate it." "Be careful, Marcus," Frank warned. "Brock's a mean son of a gun, and he doesn't forgive easily." "I'll keep that in mind," Marcus replied. Armed with this new information, Marcus decided to take a closer look at the warehouse. He waited until nightfall, knowing the darkness would provide better cover. The warehouse was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusting machinery. It was a relic of Clearfield's industrial past, now repurposed as the vulture's stronghold. Marcus parked his truck a safe distance away and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. As he got closer, he could see lights spilling out from the warehouse's windows and hear the muffled sounds of music and laughter. The vultures were inside, celebrating something, or maybe just drowning their frustrations from the ambush. He crouched behind a stack of rusted barrels, his eyes scanning the area. 2 bikers stood guard outside the main entrance, their postures relaxed but their eyes alert. Marcus studied them carefully, noting the way they shifted their weight and the positions of their weapons. These weren't amateurs. They were disciplined, at least compared to the gang members he'd already faced. Marcus took out a small notepad from his jacket pocket, jotting down observations. He counted the number of bikes parked outside, 12, and made note of the security measures in place. There were cameras mounted above the entrance and a chain-link fence surrounding the property, though the gate was left open. As he observed, a thought occurred to him. Brock wasn't just trying to intimidate him. He was running an operation here, something that went beyond petty harassment. The vultures' activities had to be funding their lifestyle, and Marcus intended to find out how. His observations were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. A 3rd biker emerged from the warehouse, his voice carrying as he called out to the guards. Marcus couldn't make out the words, but the tone was casual. The guards laughed, and the 3 men shared a cigarette before the newcomer went back inside. Marcus stayed in his position for another hour, gathering as much information as he could. When he was satisfied, he slipped away as quietly as he had arrived, returning to his truck and driving back to his house. His mind raced as he pieced together what he had learned. The Iron Vultures were more than just a gang of bullies. They were organized, disciplined, and likely involved in something much bigger than Marcus had initially thought. Whatever it was, it made them dangerous, not just to him, but to the entire town. That night, Marcus spread his notes across the kitchen table, mapping out everything he knew about the vultures. He reviewed his findings with the precision of a soldier planning an operation, identifying weak points and potential strategies. The warehouse was their hub, the center of their power. If Marcus was going to make a move, it would have to start there. As the hours ticked by, Marcus's resolve solidified. He wasn't just going to defend himself anymore. The vultures had made it clear they weren't going to stop, and Marcus refused to let them hold the town hostage any longer. This wasn't just his fight, it was Clearfield's, and Marcus Cruz intended to win. The morning air in Clearfield was crisp, but the town was far from its usual serenity. The tension was almost tangible, spreading like a shadow over every street and storefront. Marcus Cruz saw it in the cautious glances exchanged by the locals, in the way they hurried about their errands with their heads down, and in the hushed conversations that died when he walked past. The Iron Vultures had left their mark on Clearfield, and fear had become the town's unwelcome guest. Marcus made his way to the diner, where he knew he could pick up on the town's mood. The place was bustling, but the energy was subdued. Evelyn greeted him with a tired smile as she placed a cup of coffee in front of him. "Morning, Marcus," she said. "Heard about the warehouse. People are talking." He nodded, taking a sip of the steaming coffee. "What are they saying?" "Nothing good," Evelyn admitted. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Some folks think you're making things worse by standing up to them. Others think you're the only reason they haven't taken over completely." Marcus frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. He understood the fear that gripped the town, but it frustrated him to see how deeply it had taken root. The vultures thrived on intimidation, and as long as the townsfolk stayed silent, the gang's hold would only tighten. After finishing his breakfast, Marcus decided to visit the local community center. It was a gathering place for the town, and he hoped to gauge the residents' feelings more directly. When he arrived, he found a small group of people inside, their faces etched with worry. "Marcus," said a familiar voice. It was Sheriff Daniels, the town's weary but determined lawman. Daniels was a stocky man with a graying mustache and a no-nonsense demeanor. He approached Marcus with a firm handshake. "Heard you've been keeping busy." "Just trying to do what's right," Marcus replied. Daniel sighed. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But the Vultures aren't just a gang of thugs. They're organized, and they've got resources. If you keep pushing, they're going to push back harder." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why I'm here. We need to do more than just wait for them to make the next move." Daniel studied him for a moment before nodding. "All right, what are you thinking?" Marcus glanced around the room at the gathered residents. "We need to come together as a community. The Vultures rely on fear to control people, but if we stand united, they'll lose that power. They need to know that this town isn't theirs to take." Daniels looked skeptical but intrigued. "You're talking about organizing the townsfolk? That's a tall order, Marcus." "I'm not saying it'll be easy," Marcus replied, "but it's the only way. We can't rely on a handful of people to fight this fight. Everyone has a role to play, even if it's just refusing to back down." Word spread quickly through Clearfield about Marcus's efforts to rally the town. He began hosting informal meetings at the community center, where he shared what he'd learned about the Vultures and discussed strategies for standing up to them. The turnout was small at first, but as the days passed, more people began to show up, drawn by Marcus's unwavering resolve. During one of these meetings, Marcus stood before a modest crowd, his voice steady and commanding. "I know you're scared," he said. "I won't lie to you. Standing up to the Vultures isn't without risk, but the alternative is letting them take everything from us. This is our town, and it's time we take it back." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, but not everyone was convinced. A man in the back raised his hand. "What if they come after us? They're dangerous, Marcus. You've seen what they can do?" Marcus nodded, meeting the man's gaze. "I have seen what they can do. But I've also seen what people can do when they stand together. The Vultures want us to believe we're powerless. We're not. Together, we're stronger than they are." The words seemed to resonate with the crowd, and Marcus could see the flicker of hope in their eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Outside the meetings, Marcus worked tirelessly to build trust and unity among the townsfolk. He visited businesses, spoke with local leaders, and even helped with small tasks to show his commitment to the community. Slowly but surely, people began to open up to him, sharing their fears and frustrations. One afternoon, as Marcus was helping repair a broken fence at the edge of town, a young boy approached him. The boy couldn't have been older than 10, but his expression was serious. "Mr. Cruz," he said hesitantly. Marcus crouched to meet the boy's eyes. "What's on your mind, kid?" The boy hesitated before holding out a small handmade card. "Thank you for standing up to them. My dad says we need more people like you." Marcus took the card, his chest tightening at the gesture. "Thanks, kid. That means a lot." Moments like these reminded Marcus why he was fighting. The Vultures weren't just a threat to him, they were a threat to the heart of the community. And for every person too afraid to act, there was someone like the boy and his father, quietly hoping for a better future. As the weeks passed, the town began to change. People walked a little taller, spoke a little louder. Businesses that had been closing early out of fear started staying open later. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was progress. Marcus knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The Vultures weren't going to take the community's defiance lying down. But for the first time in a long time, Clearfield felt like it had a fighting chance. One evening, as Marcus stood on his porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Sheriff Daniels pulled up in his patrol car. He stepped out, his expression a mix of concern and determination. "Got a tip," Daniels said. "The Vultures are planning something big. Don't know what yet, but it's coming." Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then we'll be ready." Daniels gave him a long look before nodding. "Hope you're right, Marcus, for all our sakes." As Daniels drove away, Marcus turned his gaze back to the horizon. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, he didn't feel like he was fighting alone. Clearfield was waking up, and together they were ready to face whatever came next. Marcus Cruz had always relied on his ability to think ahead, to see the patterns in chaos and adapt to them. His years in the military had taught him that the best way to win a fight was to anticipate the enemy's moves before they made them. Now, as he stood in his modest living room surrounded by maps, notes, and a growing sense of urgency, Marcus realized that Clearfield's survival depended on that very skill. The Iron Vultures had made their intentions clear. They weren't going to back down. Sheriff Daniels' warning about an impending move from the gang only solidified Marcus's resolve. If they were planning something big, he needed to be ready, not just for himself, but for the entire town. His first step was to create a detailed profile of the gang. Over the past weeks, Marcus had gathered intelligence on their habits, their strengths, and their weaknesses. The warehouse on the outskirts of town was their nerve center, but it wasn't their only asset. The Vultures had connections with other gangs in nearby towns, and their network allowed them to move money, weapons, and stolen goods with relative ease. Marcus laid out his findings on the table, organizing them into categories: key members, known associates, suspected activities, and vulnerabilities. Brock was the obvious leader, but Royce, his wiry lieutenant, was just as dangerous in his own way. Royce had a sharp mind and a penchant for strategy, making him a threat Marcus couldn't underestimate. The next step was to assess the town's resources. Clearfield wasn't exactly brimming with manpower or firepower, but Marcus knew that unity could make up for a lot. He began reaching out to the townsfolk who had shown interest during the community meetings, enlisting their help in small but meaningful ways. One of the first people he turned to was Caleb, the owner of the auto repair shop. Caleb was a burly man with a gruff demeanor, but he had a deep loyalty to Clearfield and a knack for fixing just about anything. Marcus met with him one evening after hours, the smell of grease and oil thick in the air. "Caleb, I need your help," Marcus said, leaning against the workbench. "The Vultures are planning something, and we need to be ready." Caleb wiped his hands on a rag and gave Marcus a long look. "What are you thinking?" "Barriers," Marcus said. "If they try to roll into town, we need to slow them down. Can you rig up some roadblocks? Something sturdy but easy to move if we need to." Caleb nodded, his face serious. "I can do that. Won't be pretty, but it'll hold." "Pretty doesn't matter," Marcus replied. "Just make sure it works." With Caleb on board, Marcus turned his attention to other aspects of the plan. He worked with Evelyn to coordinate communication, using the diner as an unofficial hub where townsfolk could share updates and report suspicious activity. Sheriff Daniels, though skeptical at first, eventually agreed to provide what support he could, though his department's resources were stretched thin. Marcus also tapped into his own skill set, setting up makeshift defenses around key areas of the town. He used his knowledge of tactics to position barriers, create choke points, and establish safe zones where residents could regroup in the event of an attack. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. One evening, as Marcus stood on the roof of his house surveying the town, he felt a rare sense of hope. Clearfield was small, but its people were resilient. They were beginning to push back against the fear that had gripped them for so long. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming their home. But Marcus knew better than to let his guard down. Brock was still out there, and the Vultures weren't the type to take a stand without a fight. Marcus spent his nights going over his plans, adjusting and refining them based on new information. He thought about every possible scenario, every potential outcome, and worked to ensure that Clearfield had the upper hand. The tipping point came one afternoon when Marcus received a message from an unlikely source. A young man named Eric, who had recently left the Vultures, approached Marcus outside the community center. Eric was nervous, his hands fidgeting as he spoke, but his information was invaluable. "They're planning to hit the town square," Eric said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Brock wants to make an example of you, and everyone who's been standing with you." Marcus's jaw tightened. "When?" "Soon," Eric replied. They're bringing in reinforcements from out of town. It's going to be big." Marcus thanked Eric and sent him on his way, his mind racing. The vultures weren't just planning an attack. They were planning to send a message. It was a calculated move, one designed to break the town's spirit. But Marcus wouldn't let that happen. That night, he called an emergency meeting at the community center. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Marcus stood at the front, his voice steady as he laid out the situation. "The vultures are coming," he said. "We don't know the exact day or hour, but we know their target, us. They want to show us that resistance is futile, that fear is the only option, but we're not going to let them win." He outlined his plan, detailing the roadblocks, safe zones, and communication strategies. He emphasized the importance of staying calm and working together, and he reminded them that their unity was their greatest strength. As the meeting ended, Marcus felt a surge of determination. The vultures might have numbers and weapons, but Clearfield had something far more powerful: people who were willing to stand together for what was right. Marcus's tactical mind had given them a fighting chance, but it was their courage that would see them through. The stage was set, and the battle for Clearfield was about to begin. The day began like any other in Clearfield, but there was a palpable tension in the air. Marcus Cruz could feel it as he walked through town, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. He knew the Iron Vultures were coming. It was only a matter of time. Sheriff Daniel's tip about their planned attack had sent the town into overdrive, and Marcus had spent the last 48 hours ensuring every piece of his plan was in place. By noon, the town square was eerily quiet. Businesses that usually bustled with activity had closed their doors, and the streets were empty except for a few determined residents who had stayed behind to help. Marcus stood at the edge of the square, his gaze fixed on the main road leading into town. The roadblocks Caleb had built were in place, a line of makeshift barriers designed to slow the vultures' advance. Sheriff Daniels approached, his uniform crisp but his face lined with worry. "They'll be here soon," he said. "You sure about this plan?" Marcus nodded. "It'll work. We've got the element of surprise, and we're prepared. That's more than they're expecting." Daniels sighed. "Let's hope you're right." The sheriff returned to his position near the roadblocks while Marcus climbed onto the roof of a nearby building to get a better vantage point. From there, he could see the entire square and the surrounding streets. He had stationed a few trusted residents at key locations, armed with radios to relay information. The rest of the town had been evacuated to a safe zone, far from the danger. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus felt his adrenaline build. He forced himself to stay calm, to focus. He checked his radio, ensuring it was on the right frequency, and adjusted the binoculars slung around his neck. Then he saw it, a distant cloud of dust on the horizon, followed by the faint roar of engines. "They're coming," he said into the radio. The response crackled through the static. "Copy that. Everyone's in position." The vultures arrived in force, their motorcycles roaring as they tore down the main road. There were at least 20 of them, their ranks bolstered by reinforcements from nearby towns. At the head of the pack was Brock, his massive frame unmistakable even from a distance. Beside him rode Royce, his sharp eyes scanning ahead like a predator. They reached the first roadblock, a line of heavy wooden pallets reinforced with metal. Brock signaled for the gang to stop, and the engines quieted. He dismounted, his boots crunching against the pavement as he approached the barrier. "Cruz!" Brock bellowed, his voice echoing through the empty streets. "Come out and face me!" Marcus didn't move. He stayed hidden on the rooftop, watching through his binoculars as Brock paced back and forth. The gang's members spread out, their postures tense, their weapons visible. Chains, bats, and crowbars glinted in the sunlight. "You think you can hide?" Brock shouted. "You think these little tricks are going to stop us? We own this town, Cruz. You're just a stubborn fool who doesn't know when to quit." Marcus spoke into the radio. "Hold your positions. Wait for my signal." Brock turned to one of his men and barked an order. The biker revved his engine and plowed into the roadblock, splintering the wood and creating an opening. The gang surged forward, their bikes roaring as they entered the square. "Now!" Marcus shouted into the radio. In an instant, the trap was sprung. Caleb's barriers had been designed to funnel the gang into a narrow path, and as they advanced, Marcus's team unleashed their counterattack. Smoke bombs erupted from hidden positions, filling the square with thick clouds that obscured the vultures' vision. The bikers shouted in confusion, their movements chaotic as they tried to navigate the haze. From the rooftops, Marcus's allies rained down paint-filled balloons and water-soaked rags, creating a messy but effective distraction. The goal wasn't to harm, but to disorient, to sow confusion among the gang. Sheriff Daniels and a small group of deputies emerged from cover, their weapons drawn but aimed low, shouting orders for the vultures to surrender. Brock roared in fury, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Stand your ground. Don't let them win." Marcus descended from the rooftop, moving swiftly and silently through the smoke. He located Brock near the center of the square, his massive frame a beacon amid the chaos. Marcus approached him, his heart pounding but his mind focused. "Brock!" Marcus shouted, drawing the leader's attention. "It's over. Call off your men." Brock turned to face him, his expression twisted with rage. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You're nothing, Cruz. This town is ours, and you're just a washed-up soldier trying to play hero." Marcus stood his ground, his voice calm but firm. "This isn't your town, Brock. It belongs to the people who live here. You're outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Walk away before it gets worse." Brock charged, swinging a heavy chain in a wide arc. Marcus sidestepped the attack and countered with a swift punch to Brock's side. The leader stumbled but recovered quickly, his movements fueled by sheer fury. They circled each other, their fight a clash of brute strength and calculated precision. Around them, the battle raged. The vultures were in disarray, their ranks breaking under the coordinated resistance of the townsfolk and law enforcement. One by one, the bikers were subdued, their weapons confiscated, their egos deflated. Brock landed a glancing blow on Marcus's shoulder, but it wasn't enough to stop him. Marcus seized the opening and drove his elbow into Brock's chest, knocking the wind out of him. Brock fell to his knees, gasping for air, his chain clattering to the ground. "It's over," Marcus said, standing over him. "Call off your men." For a moment, Brock looked like he might resist, but then he glanced around and saw the state of his gang, defeated, disarmed, and surrounded. The fight drained out of him, and he lowered his head. "Stand down," he growled, his voice barely audible. The vultures obeyed, their weapons falling to the ground as the smoke began to clear. Sheriff Daniels stepped forward, his handcuffs at the ready. Marcus watched as the gang was rounded up, their reign of terror finally brought to an end. As the adrenaline faded, Marcus allowed himself a moment to breathe. The square was a mess, but the town had stood its ground. Clearfield had faced its greatest threat and emerged stronger for it. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. The showdown had begun, and the tide was turning. The dust had barely settled in Clearfield when the aftermath of the showdown began to take an unexpected turn. While the Iron Vultures had been defeated, not all of them had been captured or disbanded. A few members who had fled the battle were still skulking around town, trying to regroup or reclaim some semblance of their tarnished reputation. For Marcus Cruz, the days following the showdown were filled with tense vigilance, and more than a few moments of unintentional hilarity. It started with a report from Caleb, the mechanic. One of the younger vultures, a wiry kid named Travis, had been caught trying to siphon gas from Caleb's tow truck late at night. Caleb had set up a rudimentary tripwire around the lot, and when it tripped, it triggered a bucket of oil to spill directly onto Travis's head. By the time Marcus arrived to handle the situation, Travis was sitting on the curb, his hair slicked back with oil and his face twisted in a sulky pout. Caleb leaned against the truck, arms crossed and clearly amused. "Caught this one trying to sneak off with a few gallons," Caleb said, jerking a thumb toward Travis. Marcus suppressed a smile. "What were you thinking, kid?" Travis muttered something unintelligible, avoiding Marcus's gaze. "What was that?" Marcus prompted. "I said I was just trying to get out of here," Travis mumbled. "Didn't mean no harm." Marcus crouched to meet the boy's eyes. Running won't fix anything. If you want to make things right, you start by taking responsibility. Clean yourself up, and maybe think about how you got here in the first place. Travis nodded reluctantly, and Caleb handed him a rag with a smirk. "Start with that oil," Caleb said, "and don't miss a spot." The incident with Travis was just the beginning. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself dealing with a series of blunders that would have been comical if they weren't so ridiculous. Royce, Brock's sharp-tongued lieutenant, had gone into hiding, but left behind a group of less than brilliant followers who were struggling to function without leadership. One afternoon, Sheriff Daniels called Marcus to the local convenience store. When Marcus arrived, he found two bikers standing in the middle of the aisle, covered head to toe in flour and powdered sugar. The store owner was behind the counter, shaking his head in disbelief. "What happened here?" Marcus asked, struggling to keep a straight face. "They tried to steal the cash register," the owner said, "but they knocked over the baking aisle on their way out. By the time they got to the door, they were coated like donuts." Marcus turned to the bikers, who looked more sheepish than threatening. "What's the plan here, guys? You think powdered sugar makes for a good disguise?" Neither man responded, but one of them sneezed, sending a puff of flour into the air. Marcus couldn't help it. He laughed. "Clean up this mess," Marcus said, his tone firm but not unkind. "Then turn yourselves in. Sheriff Daniels will be waiting." The comedy of errors continued to unfold. Another biker was caught trying to break into the community center but managed to lock himself in the janitor's closet instead. A pair of vultures attempting to vandalize the diner's windows accidentally smashed their own motorcycles when they lost control of their bats. Each incident was more absurd than the last, and Marcus began to realize that without Brock and Royce at the helm, the gang was floundering. Evelyn, the diner's owner, summed it up best. "They're like a bunch of headless chickens," she said, wiping down the counter. "All that swagger and not an ounce of sense." Despite the humor, Marcus saw an opportunity in the chaos. The gang's mistakes were a sign that their hold on the town was weakening, and the townsfolk were beginning to notice. People who had once been afraid to speak up were now laughing at the vultures' antics, their fear replaced by a growing sense of confidence. Marcus decided to use the momentum to drive the point home. During a town meeting, he addressed the gathered residents with a mix of seriousness and humor. "We've all seen what's been happening," Marcus said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "The vultures are falling apart, and it's not because of luck. It's because we stood together. They thrive on fear, but when we stop being afraid, they lose their power. Remember that." The crowd chuckled, their spirits lifted by the reminder that the gang wasn't as invincible as they had once seemed. Marcus left the meeting feeling hopeful. The town was healing, slowly but surely. But even as the comedy unfolded, Marcus knew better than to let his guard down entirely. Brock and Royce were still out there, and their absence only meant they were regrouping, planning their next move. Marcus kept a close eye on the town, ready to act at a moment's notice. One evening, as Marcus walked home from the diner, he spotted a young man sitting on the curb, his face buried in his hands. It was Travis, the same kid who had been caught at Caleb's shop. Marcus approached him, his steps quiet but deliberate. "You're still here," Marcus said. Travis looked up, his expression a mix of embarrassment and frustration. Nowhere else to go. Marcus sat down beside him. "You ever think about starting over?" Travis shrugged. "Don't know how." "It starts with a choice," Marcus said. "You don't have to be like them. You can do better, but it's up to you." Travis didn't respond immediately, but Marcus saw the wheels turning in his mind. Finally, the boy nodded. "I'll think about it," Travis said. Marcus stood, clapping him on the shoulder. "That's a good start." As he walked away, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The comedy of errors that had followed the Vultures' defeat wasn't just a series of laughable mistakes. It was proof that their grip on Clearfield was slipping. and for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like the town had a real chance at peace. Brock sat in the dimly lit corner of a seedy bar on the outskirts of Clearfield, his massive hands gripping a bottle of beer so tightly it seemed on the verge of shattering. His face was a mask of barely contained fury, a deep scowl etched into his rugged features. The once proud leader of the Iron Vultures had never known humiliation like this. His gang, his power, his reputation, all of it was crumbling, and it burned him to his core. Around him, the remnants of the Vultures sat in uncomfortable silence. Royce, his sharp-witted lieutenant, leaned against the wall, his usual air of confidence replaced by a guarded wariness. The others kept their heads down, avoiding Brock's gaze as they nursed their drinks. The bar was filled with the low hum of conversation and the occasional clink of glasses, but for the Vultures, the atmosphere was suffocating. "Look at us," Brock growled, his voice low and venomous. "A bunch of losers hiding out in a dump like this. Is this what we've come to?" No one dared to answer. Royce shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking toward Brock before looking away. "It's that damn soldier," Brock spat, slamming the bottle onto the table with a loud crack. "Marcus Cruz. He's the reason we're in this mess." "He's smart," Royce said cautiously, his voice barely above a murmur. "We underestimated him." Brock's glare snapped to Royce. "Underestimated. We've been humiliated. The whole town's laughing at us, and it's all because of him." Royce hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We didn't plan for someone like Cruz. He's not just some tough guy. He's disciplined, trained." Brock's fists clenched, his knuckles turning white. "I don't care how trained he is. No one makes a fool out of me and gets away with it." The bar door swung open, letting in a burst of cool night air and a pair of new arrivals, two bikers from a neighboring gang who had come to offer their support. They approached Brock's table with cautious respect, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. "Heard things didn't go so well," one of them said, his tone measured. Brock's glare shifted to the newcomers. "You here to rub it in?" "Not at all," the biker replied quickly. "We're here to help. Word's gotten around that you've got a problem with this guy Cruz. Figured we could lend a hand." Brock's scowl deepened. He hated the idea of accepting help. It felt like admitting weakness. But as much as he loathed it, he knew he couldn't take on Marcus alone. The man had proven himself too resourceful, too capable. If Brock wanted to regain control of the Clearfield, he needed reinforcements. "What's in it for you?" Brock asked, his tone sharp. The biker shrugged. "Just looking to build some goodwill. We scratch your back, you scratch ours down the line." Brock considered the offer, his mind racing. The humiliation he had endured was unbearable, but with these reinforcements he could turn the tide. He could reclaim his power and crush Marcus Cruz once and for all. "Fine," Brock said finally, "but this is my fight. You follow my orders, or you're out." The bikers nodded in agreement, and Brock leaned back in his chair, a dangerous gleam in his eyes. "Good. Let's show that soldier what happens when you mess with the Iron Vultures." Over the next few days, Brock threw himself into planning. He and Royce spent hours poring over maps of Clearfield, identifying weak points and potential targets. Brock's rage fueled his determination, and he began to rally the remnants of his gang, bolstered by the newcomers. Their numbers were smaller than before, but they were united by a shared desire for revenge. Royce, despite his own doubts, worked tirelessly to execute Brock's plans. He knew better than to question his leader when he was in this state. Brock's anger was a force of nature, and Royce had no desire to be caught in its path. As the Vultures regrouped, they began to make their presence known in Clearfield once again. Small acts of vandalism and intimidation were their opening moves, designed to test the town's defenses and sow fear among the residents. Marcus and Sheriff Daniels responded swiftly, but it was clear that the gang was gearing up for something bigger. Late one night, Marcus received an anonymous tip that sent a chill down his spine. A local resident had overheard two bikers talking about a plan to ambush the town's main water supply. Marcus immediately contacted Daniels, and the two men began coordinating a response. "They're getting desperate," Marcus said, his voice grim. "But desperate people are dangerous. We can't afford to let our guard down." Daniels nodded, his face set with determination. "We'll be ready." As Marcus prepared for the next confrontation, he couldn't shake the feeling that Brock's rage was building toward a breaking point. The leader of the Vultures wasn't just trying to reclaim his power, he was lashing out, consumed by a need to prove himself. It was a dangerous combination, and Marcus knew the battle was far from over. For Brock, the thought of defeat was unbearable. Every step he took, every order he gave, was driven by a single burning desire: to crush Marcus Cruz and reclaim his place at the top. His rage was a fire that burned hotter with each passing day, and he wouldn't stop until it consumed everything in its path. As the storm gathered, Clearfield braced itself for the next wave, and Marcus Cruz, ever vigilant, stood ready to face whatever came next. Marcus Cruz had always believed that preparation was the foundation of success. In the military, he had seen countless situations go wrong when discipline faltered or plans unraveled. Now, as Clearfield faced the looming threat of Brock's regrouped Iron Vultures, Marcus drew on every ounce of his training to ensure that the town was ready for whatever came next. The first step was reinforcing the town's defenses. After the showdown in the square, many of the makeshift barriers had been damaged or destroyed. Marcus worked alongside Caleb and other volunteers to rebuild them, this time with added reinforcements. Wooden pallets were replaced with sturdier materials, and strategic choke points were fortified with heavy machinery borrowed from the local construction yard. "Anything worth doing is worth overdoing," Caleb joked as he welded a steel plate onto a barrier. "If they want to get through this, they'll need a tank." Marcus smirked but remained focused. "They'll try to outthink us this time. We can't afford to underestimate them." While the physical preparations were underway, Marcus turned his attention to the people. The community's morale had improved since the Vultures' initial defeat, but Marcus knew that fear still lingered beneath the surface. He began holding daily training sessions in the community center, teaching residents basic self-defense and emergency protocols. At one session, Marcus demonstrated how to disarm an attacker using nothing but a broom handle. The crowd watched intently as he moved with precision and confidence, his voice calm but commanding. "It's not about strength," Marcus explained. "It's about timing and leverage. Use what you have and stay focused. Panic is your enemy." A young woman raised her hand. "What if they have weapons?" Marcus nodded. "Good question. The goal isn't to fight if you don't have to. It's to buy yourself time to get away or call for help. Remember, survival is the priority." The sessions were a success, and more people began attending each day. Marcus saw the shift in their demeanor. Less fear, more determination. It was a small victory, but an important one. Sheriff Daniels, who had been skeptical of Marcus's approach at first, began to see the value in his methods. One evening, as they patrolled the outskirts of town, Daniels admitted as much. "You're making a difference," Daniels said, his tone gruff but sincere. "People trust you. They believe in you." Marcus glanced at the sheriff. "They believe in themselves. I'm just showing them how." Daniels grunted in agreement. "Still, it's good to have someone like you around. Keeps the rest of us grounded." As the days passed, Marcus continued to refine his strategy. He spent hours studying maps of the town, identifying potential weak points and escape routes. He reviewed the Vultures' previous tactics, anticipating their next move. Every detail mattered, and Marcus left nothing to chance. One evening, as he worked late into the night, Evelyn stopped by with a thermos of coffee. She set it down on the table and gave him a pointed look. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Marcus. Even soldiers need rest." Marcus smiled faintly. Rest comes after the fight. Evelyn shook her head but didn't argue. She knew better than to try. Just don't forget to take care of yourself. Clearfield needs you in one piece. I'll be fine, Marcus assured her. Thanks for the coffee. Despite his relentless focus, Marcus couldn't ignore the growing pressure. He had faced life-or-death situations before, but this felt different. And this wasn't just a battle. It was a fight for a community's future. The weight of that responsibility was heavy, but Marcus bore it with the quiet determination of someone who had been forged in the crucible of adversity. The tipping point came when a scout reported suspicious activity near the town's eastern edge. Marcus and Sheriff Daniels investigated and found evidence of recent movement: tire tracks, discarded cigarette butts, and footprints leading toward an abandoned barn. It was clear that the vultures were planning something, but the details remained elusive. "They're testing us," Marcus said as he surveyed the area, "looking for cracks in our defenses." Daniels nodded. "They won't find any." "We need to stay ahead of them," Marcus said. "Double the patrols and keep the communication lines open. If they make a move, we'll be ready." As the night deepened, Marcus returned home and reviewed his plans one last time. His mind raced with possibilities, but he forced himself to focus. Discipline had always been his anchor, and now, more than ever, he needed to rely on it. The following morning, Marcus called a town meeting. He stood before the gathered residents, his voice steady and resolute. "We've come a long way," Marcus began. "When this started, the vultures thought they could control us with fear, but we've shown them that Clearfield isn't afraid. We've stood together, and that's our greatest strength." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The fight isn't over, but we're ready. We know their tactics, and we've prepared for every possibility. Whatever they throw at us, we'll face it head-on, because this town is worth fighting for." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the community center. Marcus saw the fire in their eyes, the resolve that had replaced the fear. Clearfield was ready. As the meeting ended, Marcus felt a rare sense of peace. The battle ahead would be difficult, but he knew they had a chance. The discipline he had cultivated over years of service was now the town's foundation, and it was holding strong. That night, as Marcus stood on his porch, the wind carried the faint scent of rain. The storm was coming, but Marcus wasn't afraid. He had faced worse and survived. Clearfield would too. For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. They were ready. The Iron Vultures were not used to losing. For years they had ruled with fear, their reputation enough to cow anyone who dared to challenge them. But now, scattered and demoralized, their desperation was beginning to show. Brock's fury burned brighter than ever, and his orders grew more erratic as the gang scrambled to regain control of Clearfield. Late one evening, Royce and a handful of loyal members gathered in the shadow of an abandoned warehouse. The cold wind howled through the broken windows, carrying with it an air of unease. Royce leaned against a rusted pillar, his sharp eyes scanning the room as Brock paced back and forth, his movements jerky and restless. "We can't keep this up," Royce said, his voice low but firm. "We're spread too thin, and Cruz has the town on his side. We need a new plan." Brock stopped pacing, turning to face his lieutenant. "A new plan? You mean running away with our tails between our legs?" Royce didn't flinch under Brock's glare. "I'm saying we need to be smarter about this. Hitting random targets isn't working. It's making us look weak." Brock's fist slammed into a nearby table, sending a stack of papers flying. "I don't care how we look. I want results." The tension in the room was palpable, but Royce stood his ground. "If you want results, you need to listen. Cruz isn't like the others. He's disciplined, and he's got the town organized. If we want to take him down, we have to hit him where it hurts." Brock's jaw tightened, but he nodded reluctantly. "Fine. What do you have in mind?" Royce stepped forward, his tone measured. "We create chaos. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and keep them guessing. We draw Cruz out, make him overextend himself. When he's vulnerable, we strike." Brock considered the plan, his mind racing. Chaos was something the Vultures excelled at, and Royce's strategy played to their strengths. "All right," Brock said finally. "Let's do it." The Vultures wasted no time putting the plan into action. Over the next few days, they launched a series of coordinated attacks designed to spread fear and confusion. A power substation on the edge of town was sabotaged, plunging parts of Clearfield into darkness. Several cars were set ablaze in the middle of the night, their smoldering wrecks a grim warning to anyone who dared oppose the gang. Marcus Cruz was quick to respond, working tirelessly alongside Sheriff Daniels and the townsfolk to contain the damage. But the Vultures' tactics were unpredictable, and Marcus knew they were testing his limits. One evening, as Marcus and Daniels surveyed the burned-out remains of a family's car, the sheriff shook his head in frustration. "They're trying to wear us down," Daniels said, "make us lose focus." "They're desperate," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "They know they can't beat us head-on, so they're trying to force mistakes. We won't give them the satisfaction." Despite Marcus's confidence, the constant attacks began to take their toll. Sleep was a luxury he could no longer afford, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. Evelyn noticed the strain during one of her late-night visits to the community center, where Marcus was poring over maps and reports. "You're running yourself ragged," Evelyn said, setting down a steaming cup of coffee beside him. "You can't do this alone." "I'm not alone," Marcus replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "The town's with me." "And they need you to be at your best," Evelyn countered. "You're not helping anyone if you burn out." Marcus sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'll rest when this is over." Evelyn shook her head but didn't press further. She knew Marcus well enough to recognize the futility of arguing. Instead, she stayed with him, offering quiet support as he worked through the night. Meanwhile, the Vultures continued their campaign of terror. Royce had identified several key locations around Clearfield, and the gang targeted them one by one. The community's water tower was vandalized, forcing residents to rely on bottled water. A shipment of supplies meant for the local food bank was stolen, leaving dozens of families without essentials. Each attack was a blow to the town's morale, but Marcus refused to let despair take hold. He organized patrols to guard vulnerable areas and worked with Caleb to repair damaged infrastructure. Slowly but surely, Clearfield began to adapt to the Vultures' tactics, their resilience shining through even in the darkest moments. The turning point came when Marcus intercepted a coded message from one of the Vultures. With the help of a former cryptographer who had retired to Clearfield, he was able to decipher the message. It revealed the gang's next target, the town's emergency response center. "This is it," Marcus told Daniels as they reviewed the decoded message. "They're trying to cripple us. If they take out the response center, it'll throw the entire town into chaos." Daniels nodded grimly. "Then, we make sure they don't succeed." Marcus wasted no time rallying the townsfolk. He set up a perimeter around the response center, positioning volunteers at key points and reinforcing the building's defenses. When the Vultures arrived under cover of darkness, they found themselves outmatched. The ensuing confrontation was swift and decisive. Marcus's preparation and discipline paid off, and the gang was forced to retreat after suffering significant losses. For the first time, the Vultures' desperation had backfired, and Clearfield emerged stronger than ever. As the sun rose over the town the next morning, Marcus stood outside the response center, his body weary but his spirit unbroken. The battle was far from over, but Clearfield had weathered the storm. The Vultures' desperation had revealed their weaknesses, and Marcus was determined to exploit them. For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself a moment of hope. The tide was turning, and Clearfield was ready to fight back. The morning after the Vultures' failed assault on the emergency response center, Marcus Cruz woke to an unexpected message. Slipped under his door was an envelope, its plain exterior giving away nothing about its contents. He picked it up carefully, his instincts on high alert, and opened it to reveal a single sheet of paper with neatly typed text. You don't stand alone. Help is closer than you think. Meet at the old railroad station at midnight. Come alone. Marcus's first reaction was suspicion. He had seen traps disguised as olive branches before, and the timing of the note was too convenient to ignore. Yet there was something about its simplicity, its tone, that made him consider the possibility of legitimacy. Clearfield had rallied behind him, but an ally from the outside could tip the scales in their favor. Marcus spent the day preparing for the meeting, his military training guiding every decision. He informed Sheriff Daniels of the situation, providing the location and time in case things went south. "You sure about this?" Daniels asked, his brow furrowed. "Could be a setup." "It could," Marcus admitted. "But if it's not, we can't afford to ignore it. Stay close, but don't engage unless you hear trouble." Daniels nodded reluctantly. "Be careful out there." When midnight arrived, Marcus approached the old railroad station with cautious steps. The once bustling hub of activity was now a crumbling relic, its platform covered in weeds and its walls scarred by graffiti. The moon cast long shadows across the desolate space, and the only sounds were the distant chirps of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Marcus scanned the area, his senses heightened. A figure emerged from the shadows, their movements deliberate but unthreatening. They were cloaked in a long, dark coat, and a hood obscured most of their face. Marcus's hand rested on the concealed weapon at his side, but he didn't draw it. "You came," the figure said, their voice low but steady. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, his tone firm but not hostile. The figure pulled back their hood, revealing a woman with sharp features and piercing eyes. She looked to be in her early 40s, her expression a mix of calm and determination. "My name is Lena," she said. "I used to run with the Vultures, back when Brock's father was in charge. Things were different then." Marcus studied her closely, searching for signs of deceit. "Why are you here now?" Lena's gaze didn't waver. "Because I've seen what Brock has done to this town, to people like me, and because I know things that can help you stop him." Marcus hesitated. The information she offered could be invaluable, but her connection to the Vultures made her a potential liability. "Why should I trust you?" Lena's eyes hardened. "You don't have to, but if you want to end this, you'll need what I know. Brock's got plans, big ones, and he's more dangerous than you think." After a tense moment, Marcus nodded. "Talk." Lena explained that Brock had been working with a network of gangs across the region, using them to smuggle weapons and stolen goods. The chaos in Clearfield was just the beginning. Brock intended to use the town as a base of operations for a larger criminal enterprise. His ultimate goal was to consolidate power, eliminating anyone who stood in his way. "His next move will be his biggest," Lena warned. "He's bringing in reinforcements, dozens of bikers from all over. They're planning a full-scale assault to take back the town, and to take you out." Marcus's mind raced as he processed the information. If Lena was telling the truth, Clearfield was about to face a level of violence it hadn't seen before. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. "Because I've seen what happens when men like Brock get their way," Lena said, her voice laced with bitterness. "And because I want to make things right. I can't undo the past, but I can help you stop him." Marcus weighed her words carefully. Trust didn't come easily to him, but Lena's knowledge was too valuable to dismiss. "All right," he said. "If you're serious about helping, there's one condition. You follow my lead. No exceptions." Lena nodded. "Deal." Over the next few days, Lena proved her worth. She provided detailed information about the Vultures' movements, their supply routes, and their plans for the assault. Her insights allowed Marcus to adjust his strategies, strengthening Clearfield's defenses and cutting off the gang's resources. Sheriff Daniels, while initially skeptical of Lena, began to see the value of her intel. "She's either telling the truth, or she's the best liar I've ever met," Daniels said during one of their strategy sessions. "She's telling the truth," Marcus replied. "And if she's not, we'll deal with it." As the town braced for the next wave, Lena worked quietly in the background, helping Marcus and his team prepare. Her knowledge of the Vulture's tactics gave Clearfield a fighting chance, and her presence became a source of hope for those who had once felt powerless. One evening, as Marcus and Lena reviewed their plans, she spoke softly. "You remind me of him," she said. Marcus looked up, puzzled. "Who?" "Brock's father," Lena said. "He was tough, but fair. He believed in strength, but not in cruelty. Brock, he took everything his father stood for and twisted it. That's why I left." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "We'll stop him," he said firmly. "One way or another." Lena's gaze was steady. "I know you will." As the days passed, Marcus began to see Lena not as an outsider, but as an ally. Her contributions were invaluable, and her determination matched his own. Together, they worked to ensure that Clearfield was ready for whatever Brock had planned. The stage was set, and the battle for Clearfield was about to reach its climax. Allies had emerged from the shadows, and Marcus Cruz was more determined than ever to protect the town he had come to call home. The tension in Clearfield reached a boiling point as Marcus Cruz worked tirelessly to prepare for the inevitable clash with Brock and his reinforcements. Lena's intel had been instrumental, but it also painted a disturbing picture of Brock's ambitions. The man wasn't just leading a gang, he was building an empire, one brick of fear at a time. Marcus knew that to stop the Vultures he had to go straight to the source, and that meant unmasking the true depths of Brock's operation. One evening, as Marcus and Lena reviewed the latest updates, she mentioned something that made him pause. "Brock's got a hideout," Lena said, her tone serious. "It's where he keeps his most valuable assets, records, weapons, and plans. If we can get to it, we'll have everything we need to take him down." Marcus leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Where is it?" "An abandoned mine just outside town," Lena replied. "It's heavily guarded, but it's the key to his operation. If we hit it, we can cripple him." Sheriff Daniels, who had joined them for the meeting, frowned. "That's a big risk. If Brock finds out we're coming, he'll hit back twice as hard." "We don't have a choice," Marcus said firmly. "If we wait, he'll bring the fight to us on his terms. This is our chance to get ahead." The three of them spent the rest of the night planning the raid. Lena sketched a rough map of the mine, detailing its entrances and known defenses. Daniels organized a small team of trusted deputies, while Marcus coordinated with the townsfolk to ensure Clearfield's defenses would hold in case of retaliation. When the day of the raid arrived, Marcus led the group into the forest surrounding the mine. The air was thick with tension, and the crunch of leaves underfoot seemed deafening in the stillness. Marcus signaled for the group to halt as they approached the mine's perimeter. He scanned the area through binoculars, noting the positions of the guards. "There are 6 of them," Marcus whispered. 2 at the entrance, 4 patrolling. We'll need to take them out quietly." Lena nodded, her expression grim. "Leave the 2 at the entrance to me. I know how they think." Marcus hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right, be careful." The plan unfolded with precision. Lena approached the guards at the entrance, feigning familiarity as she struck up a conversation. Within moments, she had disarmed them with a combination of quick thinking and well-placed strikes. Meanwhile, Marcus and the deputies moved silently through the shadows, incapacitating the patrolling guards one by one. With the perimeter secure, the group entered the mine. The air inside was damp and heavy, and the faint glow of electric lights illuminated the narrow tunnels. Marcus led the way, his movements deliberate and quiet. They passed crates of weapons and supplies, evidence of the Vulture's growing arsenal. At the heart of the mine, they found a makeshift command center. A large table was covered in maps, blueprints, and documents detailing Brock's operations. Marcus's eyes scanned the papers, noting the scope of Brock's plans. He was using Clearfield as a hub to coordinate illegal activities across the region. trafficking, extortion, and even alliances with other gangs. "This is it," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "This is what we need." As the group began gathering evidence, Lena froze, her eyes fixed on a metal locker in the corner of the room. "Wait," she said. "There's more." Marcus followed her gaze. "What is it?" Lena approached the locker cautiously, her hand hovering over the latch. "If I'm right, this is where Brock keeps his personal files, the ones he doesn't want anyone to see." She opened the locker, revealing a trove of documents and photographs. Marcus sifted through them, his brow furrowing as he pieced together the story they told. Brock's rise to power was marked by betrayal and violence, but what caught Marcus's attention was a series of receipts and correspondence linking Brock to a corrupt official in a nearby city. "This is huge," Marcus said. "If we can expose this, we can cut off his support and turn his allies against him." Before they could celebrate their discovery, the sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Marcus signaled for silence, and the group quickly extinguished the lights. They pressed against the walls, their breaths shallow as the footsteps grew louder. A group of vultures entered the command center, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Marcus waited until the last possible moment before springing into action. He took out the first man with a swift strike, while Lena and the deputies engaged the others. The fight was brief but intense, and the group managed to subdue the intruders without alerting the rest of the gang. "We need to move," Marcus said urgently. "They'll know something's wrong soon." The group exited the mine with the stolen evidence, moving quickly but cautiously. By the time they reached the forest, the sound of alarms echoed behind them. Marcus glanced back, his jaw tightening. The vultures would be on high alert now, but they had what they needed. Back in Clearfield, Marcus and Daniels reviewed the evidence in detail. The documents not only confirmed Brock's plans, but also provided a clear picture of his network and resources. With this information, they could strike at the heart of his operation and dismantle it piece by piece. "This is our chance," Daniels said, his voice filled with determination. "We can end this." Marcus nodded, his expression resolute. "We will. But we need to act fast. Brock won't sit still after this." As the town prepared for the next phase of the fight, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The raid on the mine had been a gamble, but it had paid off. The evidence they had uncovered was a weapon more powerful than any gun or barrier, and Marcus intended to use it to bring Brock's empire crashing down. The battle for Clearfield was far from over, but for the first time, Marcus felt the tide turning in their favor. The mask had been ripped away, and Brock's true face was now exposed. It was only a matter of time before the leader of the vultures faced the reckoning he had tried so desperately to avoid. The days following the raid on the mine were a whirlwind of activity in Clearfield. The evidence Marcus Cruz and his team had uncovered painted a vivid picture of Brock's operation, and it gave the town a clear path forward. But as they moved to dismantle the vultures' network, the gang's desperation reached a breaking point. Brock's fury was palpable. The alarms at the mine had alerted him to the raid, and the loss of his plans and resources was a blow he hadn't anticipated. He rallied his remaining forces, calling in every favor, every alliance he had built over the years. Reinforcements arrived from neighboring gangs, swelling the vultures' ranks and giving Brock the numbers he needed for a final push. Clearfield, too, was preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The town was buzzing with activity as residents reinforced defenses, stocked supplies, and coordinated plans under Marcus's leadership. The tension in the air was thick, a mix of fear and determination that kept everyone on edge. One evening, Marcus called a meeting at the community center to address the growing concerns. The room was packed, the crowd buzzing with nervous energy. Sheriff Daniels stood by his side, his presence a steadying force. "We've made progress," Marcus began, his voice steady but firm. "The evidence we recovered has already started to weaken Brock's support. His allies are beginning to turn on him, and his resources are dwindling. But he's not done yet. Brock is dangerous when he's cornered, and he's bringing everything he has to this fight." A murmur ran through the crowd. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "What do we do if they attack? How do we protect ourselves?" "We stand together," Marcus said. "We've prepared for this. The defenses we've built, the plans we've made, they'll hold. But the key is unity. Brock thrives on fear and division. If we don't give him that, he can't win." The room fell silent, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in. One by one, people nodded, their expressions hardening with resolve. The town had come too far to back down now. As the meeting ended and the crowd dispersed, Marcus caught sight of Lena standing near the back of the room. She approached him, her expression unreadable. "You think they're ready for what's coming?" she asked. "They have to be," Marcus replied. "There's no turning back now." That night, Marcus patrolled the town's perimeter, his mind racing with possibilities. He knew Brock was planning something big, but the details eluded him. Every sound, every shadow seemed to carry the weight of impending danger. It came 2 nights later. The first explosion rocked the town just after midnight, a deafening blast that shattered windows and lit up the sky. Marcus bolted from his bed, grabbing his gear and racing into the streets. The source of the explosion was the town's power substation, now engulfed in flames. Sheriff Daniels was already on the scene, coordinating efforts to contain the fire. "This was no accident," Daniels said, his voice tight with anger. "They're making their move." Marcus nodded grimly. "We need to secure the town. They'll hit other targets while we're distracted here." His prediction proved correct. Over the next hour, reports came in of fires, vandalism, and attacks on key locations around Clearfield. The vultures had unleashed chaos, hoping to divide and conquer. But Marcus had anticipated this. He rallied his team, deploying them strategically to defend the town. At the diner, Evelyn and a group of volunteers fought to repel a group of bikers attempting to break in. At the community center, Caleb and his team held the line against another wave of attackers. Each clash was fierce, but the townsfolk held their ground, their determination outweighing their fear. As Marcus coordinated efforts from a central location, Lena approached him, her face pale but resolute. "There's something you need to see," she said, her voice urgent. She led him to the edge of town, where a group of vultures had set up a blockade on the main road. Among them was Royce, Brock's lieutenant, shouting orders and directing the chaos. Marcus's jaw tightened. "This is it. If we take him down, we can break their momentum." He signaled for Daniels and a small team to join him. Moving under the cover of darkness, they approached the blockade, their movement silent and calculated. Marcus counted the bikers, 15 in total, heavily armed but disorganized. "On my signal," Marcus whispered. "Take out the ones on the perimeter first." The ambush was swift and precise. Marcus and his team struck from the shadows, disabling the vultures one by one. Royce fought back fiercely, but he was no match for Marcus's skill and discipline. Within minutes, the blockade was dismantled, and Royce was subdued. As Daniels cuffed him, Royce spat on the ground, his defiance undimmed. "You think this changes anything?" he sneered. "Brock's coming for you, and when he does, you're dead." Marcus met his gaze, his voice cold and steady. "We'll be ready." The capture of Royce was a turning point. With their leader's right-hand man in custody, the vultures' coordination faltered. The remaining bikers scattered, their attacks losing focus and intensity. By dawn, the town was battered but intact. The fires had been extinguished, the damage contained. As the sun rose over Clearfield, Marcus stood on the steps of the community center, his body weary but his spirit unbroken. The town had faced its darkest night and emerged stronger for it. But Marcus knew the fight was far from over. Brock was still out there, and the final confrontation was drawing closer with each passing day. For now, though, Clearfield had won a hard-fought victory, and Marcus Cruz was more determined than ever to finish what they had started. The aftermath of the Vulture's night of chaos left Clearfield bruised but not broken. The fires had been extinguished, the damage repaired as much as possible, and the town had rallied together in a way Marcus Cruz had hoped but never fully expected. However, the capture of Royce, Brock's second-in-command, marked a critical shift in the battle. Sheriff Daniels arranged for Royce to be held in a secure location, far from the reach of the remaining Vultures. The gang's organization was already crumbling under the weight of their failed attacks, but Marcus knew that Royce held vital information, knowledge that could give Clearfield the edge they needed to end this fight for good. Marcus and Daniel sat across from Royce in a small, dimly lit room in the sheriff's office. Royce's hands were cuffed to the table, his defiance evident in the sharpness of his glare. Despite his situation, he exuded a quiet arrogance, as if he believed the Vultures would come for him any moment. "You're wasting your time," Royce said, leaning back in his chair. "Brock's not going to stop, and neither am I." Marcus's gaze was steady. "We're not asking you to stop. We're asking you to think. Brock doesn't care about you. He didn't care when we took the mine, and he doesn't care now. You're expendable to him." Royce smirked. "Nice try. I've been with Brock since the beginning. He's loyal to his own." "Loyal," Daniels cut in, his voice laced with skepticism. "Loyal enough to send you to the front lines while he hides in the shadows? Loyal enough to leave you here to rot while he plans his next move? Open your eyes, Royce. You're a pawn in his game, and you know it." For a moment, Royce's expression faltered, but he quickly recovered, his smirk returning. "You think you can turn me? Good luck with that." Marcus leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. "This isn't about turning you. It's about survival. Brock's empire is falling apart, and you can either go down with it or help us stop him. Your choice." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Royce's jaw tightened, his internal conflict clear. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice low. "What's in it for me?" "Protection," Marcus replied. "A chance to start over, but you need to give us something solid." Royce hesitated, then sighed. "All right, Brock's got a fallback plan. He's regrouping at a warehouse near the state line. It's one of his main hubs, heavily guarded. He's waiting for reinforcements before making his next move." Daniels scribbled down the information, his expression grim. "How many men?" "More than you can handle," Royce said with a grin. "But if you're stupid enough to go after him, you'll find him there." Marcus nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. "Thanks for the tip. Let's hope it's worth something." With the information in hand, Marcus and Daniels regrouped with Lena and the rest of their team to plan the next steps. The warehouse was a critical target, but it was also a trap waiting to be sprung. Marcus knew they couldn't walk into it blindly. "We need to draw him out," Marcus said during their strategy meeting. "Force him to act on our terms, not his." Lena nodded. "Brock's pride is his weakness. If he thinks he's losing control, he'll make mistakes. We need to exploit that." The team devised a plan to create the illusion of vulnerability, spreading false information that Clearfield's defenses were weakened by the recent attacks. The goal was to bait Brock into launching a premature assault, one that would expose his position and leave him vulnerable. Over the next few days, Marcus and his team worked tirelessly to execute the plan. They leaked carefully crafted rumors through trusted channels, ensuring the information would reach Brock's ears. At the same time, they reinforced Clearfield's defenses, setting traps and positioning their forces strategically. The waiting was the hardest part. Every hour that passed felt like an eternity, the anticipation gnawing at everyone's nerves. Marcus patrolled the town constantly, checking and rechecking every detail. He knew that one mistake could cost them everything. Finally, the trap was sprung. A scout reported movement near the town's outskirts, dozens of bikers converging on Clearfield, their engines roaring like thunder. Brock had taken the bait. Marcus stood at the edge of town, his team assembled around him. Sheriff Daniels, Lena, Caleb and Evelyn were among them, their faces grim but determined. The townsfolk had rallied once again, their resolve unshaken despite the odds. "This is it," Marcus said, his voice carrying over the sound of the approaching bikes. "We've planned for this. Stick to your positions, follow the plan, and we'll come out on top." The first wave of vultures hit the town hard, their attacks coordinated but desperate. Marcus's traps worked as intended, slowing their advance and throwing their ranks into disarray. The townsfolk fought with everything they had, their unity and preparation proving to be their greatest strengths. Brock himself arrived near the height of the battle, his massive frame unmistakable as he barked orders and rallied his men. Marcus watched from a distance, his jaw tightening. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "Daniels, take over here," Marcus said. "I'm going after Brock." The sheriff nodded, his expression resolute. "Be careful." Marcus moved through the chaos with precision, his military training guiding his every step. He found Brock near the center of town, surrounded by a group of loyal followers. The leader of the vultures turned as Marcus approached, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Cruz," Brock said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long." "Funny," Marcus replied, his tone cold. "I was thinking the same thing about you." The two men circled each other, the battle raging around them. Brock lunged first, his attacks fueled by raw power and fury. But Marcus was faster, his movements calculated and precise. The clash was intense, each man fighting with everything he had. As the fight wore on, it became clear that Brock's strength was no match for Marcus's discipline. With one final decisive move, Marcus disarmed him and brought him to his knees. The leader of the vultures glared up at him, his defiance undimmed. "It's over," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Your reign of terror ends here." The capture of Brock marked a pivotal moment in Clearfield's battle against the Iron Vultures. The once dominant gang was now leaderless, their ranks fractured and their plans in disarray. But Marcus Cruz knew the fight wasn't over yet. There were still remnants of the gang scattered across the region, clinging to the hope of salvaging what remained of their power. Sheriff Daniels wasted no time interrogating Brock, but the gang leader remained defiant, refusing to cooperate. "You think this changes anything?" Brock snarled during one of their sessions. "The vultures aren't done. You'll never stop us." Marcus watched from the corner of the room, his expression calm but unreadable. He had faced men like Brock before, bullies who thrived on fear and intimidation. But Brock's bravado was hollow now, his empire crumbling around him. "We don't need your help," Marcus said coldly. "We've already dismantled your operation. Your men are scattered, your resources are gone, and your allies are abandoning you. It's over." Brock glared at him but said nothing. Marcus turned to Daniels. "Focus on the lieutenants we've captured. They'll talk before he does." The strategy paid off. Royce, now separated from Brock and facing the prospect of a long prison sentence, began to cooperate. He provided critical information about the gang's remaining hideouts and the identities of key members still at large. With this intel, Marcus and Daniels launched a series of coordinated strikes to finish what they had started. The first target was a safe house located on the outskirts of a neighboring town. Lena joined Marcus and a team of deputies for the raid, her knowledge of the vultures' tactics proving invaluable. As they approached the safe house under the cover of darkness, Marcus reviewed the plan one last time. "We go in fast and quiet," he said. "Minimize collateral damage. Our goal is to capture, not kill. Let's move." The operation unfolded with precision. The team breached the safe house, catching the gang members inside off guard. Within minutes, the building was secured, and several high-ranking vultures were in custody. Among them was a man named Jax, one of Brock's most trusted enforcers. "You're wasting your time," Jax sneered as he was led away in handcuffs. "This won't change anything." Marcus ignored him, his focus already shifting to the next objective. Each raid brought them closer to dismantling the vultures entirely, but the process was slow and methodical. Marcus knew that rushing would lead to mistakes, and mistakes could be deadly. Back in Clearfield, the town was beginning to heal. The damage from the vultures' attacks was being repaired, and the residents were reclaiming their sense of normalcy. Evelyn reopened the diner, and Caleb returned to his garage, both determined to rebuild what had been lost. The community's resilience was a testament to their strength, and Marcus found himself admiring their spirit. One evening, as Marcus walked through the town square, Lena approached him, her expression thoughtful. "You've done something incredible here," she said. "Most people would have given up, but you kept fighting." Marcus shrugged. "It wasn't just me. This town fought back. I just showed them how." Lena smiled faintly. "Still, they couldn't have done it without you." As the weeks passed, the raids continued. Each success weakened the vultures further, their influence shrinking with every captured member and dismantled operation. Marcus worked tirelessly, his determination unshaken despite the physical and emotional toll the fight had taken. The turning point came during a raid on a warehouse that served as the gang's final stronghold. The operation was the most dangerous yet, with heavily armed vultures determined to make a last stand. Marcus led the charge, his team moving with the precision and discipline of a well-trained unit. The battle was intense, the air filled with the sounds of gunfire and shouted commands. Marcus stayed calm under pressure, directing his team and ensuring they maintained the upper hand. Slowly but surely, they pushed the vultures back, forcing them to surrender or flee. By the end of the night, the warehouse was secured, and the last of the vultures' leadership was in custody. Marcus surveyed the scene, his body weary but his spirit unbroken. The gang's fall was complete, their reign of terror finally brought to an end. Back in Clearfield, the news of the vultures' defeat spread quickly. The town erupted in celebration, their joy and relief palpable. Marcus watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. They had fought hard for their freedom, and they had won. Evelyn found him sitting on the steps of the community center, a rare smile on his face. "You did it," she said, sitting down beside him. "We all did." Marcus nodded. "It's not just about beating the vultures. It's about what comes next. This town needs to stay strong, to keep building on what we've started." "And it will," Evelyn said firmly, "because of you." As the celebrations continued, Marcus allowed himself a moment of peace. The fight for Clearfield had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, but it had also reminded him of the power of resilience and unity. The vultures were gone, but the lessons they had learned would stay with the town forever. For the first time in months, Marcus felt a sense of closure. The gang's fall was a victory, not just for Clearfield, but for everyone who had stood up to fear and fought for a better future. With the Iron Vultures defeated and Brock safely behind bars, the tension that had gripped Clearfield for months finally began to ease. The town, though battered, was determined to reclaim its identity. People returned to their routines, businesses reopened, and laughter once again echoed through the streets. For Marcus Cruz, this newfound sense of normalcy was a welcome change, though it came with its own set of challenges. The first hint of trouble came one morning when Caleb burst into the diner, his face red with frustration and his hands covered in grease. He stormed over to Marcus, who was enjoying a rare moment of peace with a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs. "Marcus," Caleb huffed, "you need to come down to the garage, now." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" Caleb threw up his hands. "You'll see soon enough. Just get over there." Intrigued, Marcus followed Caleb to the garage where he was greeted by a bizarre sight. A group of teenagers standing sheepishly around a heavily dented pickup truck. The vehicle looked as though it had been through a demolition derby with scratches, broken windows, and a flat tire. "What happened here?" Marcus asked, trying to suppress a grin. One of the teens, a gangly boy named Peter, shuffled his feet and muttered, "We were, practicing our driving." "Practicing?" Caleb snapped. "It looks like you were trying to reenact a car chase scene." The other teens mumbled apologies, their faces turning various shades of red. Marcus crossed his arms, his expression a mix of amusement and exasperation. "Well, you've got a lot of practice ahead of you after you help Caleb fix this mess." The teens groaned but nodded, and Caleb grumbled under his breath as he handed them tools. Marcus couldn't help but chuckle. The incident was harmless compared to what the town had been through, and it was a relief to deal with a problem that didn't involve life-or-death stakes. The comedic mishaps didn't end there. A few days later, Evelyn called Marcus to the diner, where she was dealing with a particularly stubborn raccoon that had decided to take up residence in the pantry. Armed with a broom and a box of crackers, Marcus attempted to coax the animal out, only to find himself in a slapstick battle that left him covered in flour and the raccoon scurrying out the back door. When Evelyn handed him a towel, barely suppressing her laughter, Marcus shook his head. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Maybe a little," Evelyn admitted with a grin, "but I appreciate the help." As the days passed, more light-hearted incidents reminded Marcus of the community's resilience. A local farmer accidentally drove his tractor into a ditch, prompting half the town to turn up with shovels and ropes to help pull it out. A miscommunication at the bakery led to a surplus of cupcakes, which were promptly distributed to delighted townsfolk. Even the remaining members of the Vultures who had chosen to stay in Clearfield began to integrate, with Travis, once caught siphoning gas, taking a job at Caleb's garage. One afternoon, Marcus found himself roped into a pie-eating contest during the town's first post-crisis festival. The event, hastily organized by Evelyn and a few other residents, was a celebration of the town's resilience. Marcus, never one to back down from a challenge, found himself at a table surrounded by cheering kids and competitive seniors. By the end of the contest, he was covered in blueberry filling, his pride intact despite losing to a 10-year-old with an impressive appetite. "Looks like you've still got some training to do," Evelyn teased as she handed him a napkin. Marcus laughed, the sound unfamiliar but welcome. "I'll add pie-eating drills to my schedule." One evening, Marcus attended a community talent show where the children of Clearfield showcased their unique skills. The night was filled with off-key singing, enthusiastic but awkward magic tricks, and a dance routine that ended in a pile of giggling performers. As Marcus sat in the audience, surrounded by smiling faces, he felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. As the show ended, Lena approached him, her usual guarded demeanor replaced with a rare, genuine smile. "Looks like the town's finding its rhythm again," she said. "They've earned it," Marcus replied. "After everything they've been through, they deserve some joy." Lena nodded, her expression softening. "And what about you? When was the last time you let yourself relax?" Marcus chuckled. "I think wrestling that raccoon counts." "I mean, really relax," Lena said, her tone serious but kind. "You've done so much for this town. You deserve to enjoy it." Marcus hesitated, her words hitting closer to home than he cared to admit. For months, his focus had been on protecting Clearfield, and he hadn't allowed himself to think about what came next. But as he looked around the room, at the smiling faces and the sense of community that had been rebuilt, he realized Lena was right. The next day, Marcus decided to take a step back, just for a while. He spent the morning helping Caleb with a repair job, the afternoon playing catch with a group of kids at the park, and the evening enjoying a quiet dinner at the diner. It was the first time in months that he felt like a part of the town, rather than just its protector. Evelyn noticed the change immediately. "You're smiling more," she said as she refilled his coffee. "I like it." Marcus shrugged, but his smile lingered. It feels good to just be. As the sun set over Clearfield, Marcus sat on his porch, watching the last rays of light disappear behind the hills. The town was quiet now, the laughter and bustle of the day giving way to a peaceful stillness. For the first time in a long time, Marcus allowed himself to believe that things would be okay. The battle for Clearfield had been hard fought, but it had also brought out the best in the community. And in the midst of the laughter and the chaos, Marcus found something he hadn't realized he was searching for, a sense of belonging. With the chaos of the Iron Vultures behind them, Clearfield was slowly finding its rhythm again. But one loose end remained, a man who had once terrorized the town and now sat in a cell, his empire reduced to ashes. Brock, the once feared leader of the Iron Vultures, was no longer a looming threat, yet his presence lingered like a shadow over Clearfield's hard-won peace. Marcus Cruz, ever pragmatic, knew that leaving Brock to rot in a cell wouldn't be enough. Justice was about more than punishment. It was about change, about giving even the most hardened individuals a chance to make things right. It was with this in mind that Marcus approached Sheriff Daniels one morning with an unorthodox proposal. "You want me to what?" Daniels asked, his eyebrows shooting up in disbelief. "I want to talk to him," Marcus said evenly. "He's dangerous, yes, but he's also a man who's lost everything. If there's even a sliver of humanity left in him, we need to find it." Daniels leaned back in his chair, skeptical. "And what makes you think Brock's going to listen to you?" Marcus shrugged. "He might not, but if we don't try, we'll never know." Reluctantly, Daniels agreed, and that afternoon Marcus found himself standing outside Brock's cell. The man on the other side of the bars looked haggard, his once imposing frame diminished by weeks of confinement, yet his eyes still burned with defiance. "What do you want?" Brock growled, not bothering to stand. Marcus crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "To talk?" Brock snorted. "You've already won, Cruz. What more do you want? To gloat?" "No," Marcus said simply. "I want to know why." The simplicity of the question caught Brock off guard. He frowned, his bravado faltering for a moment. "Why what?" "Why you started all this," Marcus replied. "Why you built the Vultures, why you terrorized this town. Was it power, money, or was it something else?" Brock didn't answer immediately. He stared at the floor, his jaw tightening. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, almost reflective. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," Marcus said. For the first time, Brock met Marcus's gaze, his eyes searching. "You ever feel like the world's stacked against you? Like no matter what you do, you'll never be enough?" Marcus didn't respond, letting the silence encourage Brock to continue. "I grew up with nothing," Brock said, his tone bitter. "No one cared about me. Not my old man, not the system, no one. So I figured if no one was going to give me anything, I'd take it myself. The Vultures, they were my way out." "And what did it cost you?" Marcus asked. Brock's lips pressed into a thin line. "Everything." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Brock's admission hanging in the air. Finally, Marcus spoke. "It doesn't have to end here. You've got a choice, Brock. You can stay in this cell and let your story end like this, or you can start making amends. It's up to you." Brock's laugh was dry and humorless. "And how am I supposed to do that?" "By helping," Marcus said. "You know things. About the Vultures, about the networks you were a part of. You can use that knowledge to make a difference. You've spent your whole life tearing things down. Maybe it's time to start building." Brock didn't respond, but Marcus could see the gears turning in his mind. He didn't press further, knowing the man needed time to process what he had said. In the days that followed, Marcus made a point of visiting Brock regularly. Their conversations were rarely easy, but slowly Brock began to open up. He shared information about the remaining members of the Vultures, their allies, and their operations. Each piece of intel brought Marcus and Daniels closer to dismantling the remnants of the gang's influence. One afternoon, as they reviewed the latest intel, Daniels shook his head in disbelief. "I'll admit, I didn't think this would work, but he's giving us more than I ever expected." Marcus nodded. "People can surprise you. Sometimes all they need is a chance." Meanwhile, Brock's cooperation didn't go unnoticed by the townsfolk. At first, there was resistance, anger, even, at the idea of giving the former gang leader any kind of leniency. But as word spread of the help he was providing, opinions began to shift. Evelyn, ever the voice of reason, summed it up best during a conversation with Marcus. "People don't have to like him," she said, "but they can respect that he's trying to make things right, and maybe that's enough." For Brock, the journey was far from easy. He struggled with the weight of his past actions, the lives he had ruined and the bridges he had burned. But with each small step, he began to see a path forward. He volunteered for community projects, working alongside the same people he had once terrorized. It wasn't forgiveness he sought, but redemption, a chance to prove that he was more than the worst thing he had ever done. One day, as he helped rebuild a section of the community center that had been damaged during the vultures' attacks, a young boy approached him, clutching a basketball. The boy hesitated, then held the ball out to Brock. "Want to play?" the boy asked. Brock stared at the ball for a moment, then took it, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Sure, kid." From a distance, Marcus watched the exchange, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over him. Change was never easy, and redemption was never guaranteed. But in that moment, he saw a glimmer of hope, not just for Brock, but for everyone who had fought to rebuild Clearfield. With the remnants of the Iron Vultures scattered and Brock showing signs of genuine remorse, Clearfield began to experience a fragile but hopeful calm. The scars of the gang's reign were still visible: burned-out buildings, cracked windows, and memories that haunted the townsfolk. But slowly, the community was learning to heal. Marcus Cruz had always been a man of action. He thrived in the chaos of battle, his military training giving him the tools to confront danger head-on. But the aftermath, the quiet rebuilding, tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Healing wasn't about quick decisions or sharp reflexes. It required patience, compassion, and trust, all things Marcus had spent years suppressing. One of his first challenges came in the form of Mr. Cartwright, an elderly shopkeeper who had lost his son in a confrontation with the vultures months earlier. The man had become a recluse, shutting himself away from the community and refusing offers of help. Marcus, knowing that healing required unity, decided to pay him a visit. When Marcus knocked on the door of Cartwright's small, weathered home, he was met with silence. He knocked again, his persistence unwavering. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing the gaunt face of a man who had aged far beyond his years. "What do you want?" Cartwright asked, his voice rough and tired. "To talk," Marcus said gently, "and to listen, if you'll let me." Cartwright's eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside, allowing Marcus into the dimly lit house. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence between them heavy with unspoken pain. Slowly, Marcus coaxed the story out of the old man, the story of a son who had been full of life, who had dreamed of leaving Clearfield for something greater, and who had been taken too soon. "I failed him," Cartwright said, his voice breaking. "I couldn't protect him." "You didn't fail him," Marcus replied, his tone firm but compassionate. "What happened wasn't your fault, and I think he'd want you to keep going, to honor his memory by living, not shutting yourself away." The conversation lasted for hours, stretching into the evening. By the time Marcus left, Cartwright's expression had softened. The weight on his shoulders lifted ever so slightly. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. Elsewhere in town, others were grappling with their own wounds. Evelyn, ever the backbone of the community, had thrown herself into helping others, but Marcus could see the toll it was taking on her. One evening, as they shared a quiet dinner at the diner, he finally broached the subject. "You don't have to do it all alone," he said. Evelyn looked up from her plate, her eyes tired but resolute. "Someone has to." Marcus reached across the table, his hand resting on hers. "We all do. Together. That's how we get through this." Her eyes glistened, and she gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Marcus." The community's recovery was bolstered by unexpected alliances. Brock, still under watch but given limited freedom to contribute, became an unlikely symbol of the town's resilience. He worked tirelessly to repair the damage his gang had caused, earning wary respect from those who once feared him. One afternoon, as Brock helped repaint the walls of the school that the vultures had vandalized, a group of children approached him, their curiosity outweighing their fear. One of them, a little girl with pigtails, tugged at his sleeve. "Why are you helping?" she asked, her voice innocent but direct. Brock paused, the paintbrush in his hand hovering over the wall. He knelt to her level, his expression serious. "Because I did a lot of bad things," he said, "and I want to make them right." The girl tilted her head, considering his answer. Then she nodded, as if satisfied, and ran off to join her friends. Brock watched her go, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself reflecting on his own wounds. For years, he had avoided connections, fearing the vulnerability they brought, but Clearfield had forced him to confront those fears, to see the strength in community and the power of shared purpose. One evening, as he sat on the steps of the community center, Lena joined him, a bottle of soda in hand. She handed it to him without a word, and they sat in companionable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "You've changed," Lena said after a while. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You're softer," she said with a small smirk. "In a good way. You let people in now." Marcus chuckled. "It's the town. They wore me down." "Not a bad thing," Lena replied. "Sometimes letting people in is the hardest battle of all." The weeks continued with small victories and setbacks alike. The townsfolk organized a community fair to raise funds for rebuilding efforts. It was a modest affair, with food stalls, games, and a small stage for local talent. Marcus found himself roped into a dunk tank, much to the delight of the children who gleefully took turns sending him splashing into the water. As Marcus sat on the sidelines later that evening, drying off and watching the townsfolk laugh and celebrate, he realized how far they had come. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined Clearfield. The town was rebuilding itself, not just physically but emotionally, as a place of hope and strength. Healing was a slow, uneven process, but it was happening. And as Marcus watched the town grow stronger, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Clearfield had given him a purpose, but it had also given him something more, a place to belong. Clearfield was steadily rebuilding, but the journey of recovery was never without setbacks. Marcus Cruz had settled into his role as a guardian and mentor, yet even in moments of peace, the shadows of his past lingered. The memories of battles fought, comrades lost, and the life he had left behind haunted him in quiet moments, creeping into his thoughts like a tide he couldn't hold back. One evening, as the town gathered for a community bonfire by the lake, Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames. The laughter and warmth of the townsfolk surrounded him, but he felt a strange sense of detachment, as though he were watching from a distance. Lena noticed his somber mood and approached him, holding out a cup of cider. "You've got that look again," she said, her tone light but probing. "What look?" Marcus asked, taking the cup. "The one that says you're a million miles away," Lena replied. "Thinking about the past?" Marcus sighed, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "Something like that." "Want to talk about it?" she offered. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet." Lena didn't push, simply standing beside him in quiet solidarity. But her presence stirred something in Marcus, a reminder that he didn't have to carry the weight alone. Later that night, as the bonfire died down and the crowd dispersed, Marcus found himself walking through the quiet streets of Clearfield. The cool night air cleared his mind, but it also brought memories rushing back, faces and voices from his time in the military, missions that had gone wrong, decisions that still haunted him. When he returned to his small house on the edge of town, he found an envelope waiting for him on the porch. There was no return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Marcus's chest tightened as he opened it, revealing a short letter and a photograph. The letter was from an old comrade, someone he hadn't heard from in years. "Marcus," the letter began, "I don't know if this will reach you, but I had to try. I heard about what you've been doing in Clearfield, and I just wanted to say, it sounds like you found something worth fighting for. I hope you're doing okay, because I still think about that mission in Kandahar. We all made choices that day, but you carried more than your share. Maybe it's time to let some of it go." The photograph was of Marcus and his unit, taken before the mission in question. They were younger then, full of fire and confidence, unaware of the price they would pay. Marcus stared at the image for a long time, the memories crashing over him in waves. The next day, Marcus sought out Lena. He found her at the diner sipping coffee and poring over some paperwork. She looked up as he approached, her brow furrowing at his expression. "Something's wrong," she said. It wasn't a question. "Hey." Marcus sat down across from her and placed the letter and photograph on the table. "This showed up last night," he said simply. Lena picked up the letter, reading it carefully before glancing at the photograph. "Who sent this?" "An old friend," Marcus replied. "Or what's left of one. We were in the same unit. That mission he's talking about, it's the reason I left the military." Lena waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "We were sent into a situation we didn't fully understand," Marcus continued, his voice heavy with regret. "The intel was bad, and we walked into an ambush. We lost half our team before we even realized what was happening. The ones who made it out, we weren't the same. I wasn't the same." He paused, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "I've spent years trying to make peace with it, but it always feels like it's just beneath the surface, waiting to pull me under." Lena reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on his. "You're not that man anymore, Marcus. You've done so much good here, helped so many people. Whatever happened then, it doesn't define who you are now." Marcus nodded, her words sinking in, though the weight of his past still lingered. "I know, but it's not just about me. It's about them, the ones we lost, the ones who didn't get a chance to move on." "You honor them by living," Lena said softly, "by making a difference." Their conversation stayed with Marcus as the days passed. He began writing letters to the families of his fallen comrades, something he had avoided for years. It was painful, but it felt like a step toward closure, a way to acknowledge their sacrifices and his own grief. Meanwhile, Clearfield continued to thrive. Brock's redemption efforts gained momentum as he took on more responsibilities, and the townsfolk began to see him in a new light. The scars of the vulture's reign remained, but they were no longer raw wounds. The town was healing, and Marcus saw echoes of his own journey in their resilience. One evening, Marcus joined a gathering at Evelyn's diner, where townsfolk shared stories of their struggles and triumphs. As he listened, he realized how interconnected their lives had become. The community's strength came not just from their individual efforts, but from their shared resolve. Later that night, as Marcus stood on a hill overlooking the town, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The shadows of his past would always be there, but they no longer held him captive. Clearfield had given him something he hadn't realized he needed, a chance to move forward, to build a life defined by hope instead of regret. For the first time, Marcus allowed himself to believe that the ghosts of his past didn't have to dictate his future. And as he watched the lights of Clearfield twinkle below, he knew he had found a place where he could finally lay those ghosts to rest. The calm that had settled over Clearfield was a testament to the community's resilience, but for Marcus Cruz, it was also a time of reflection. As the town rebuilt itself brick by brick, Marcus found himself grappling with the question of legacy, not just for Clearfield, but for himself. His past as a soldier and his present as the town's protector had collided in ways he hadn't anticipated, leaving him to wonder what kind of mark he would leave behind. One morning, as Marcus walked through the town square, he noticed a group of children playing near the newly rebuilt community center. Among them was Travis, the reformed ex-vulture, supervising the kids with a patience and kindness that Marcus found surprising. "Travis," Marcus called out, approaching him. The young man turned, a shy smile on his face. "Hey, Marcus, what's up?" Marcus nodded toward the children. "Looks like you've got a good thing going here." Travis shrugged. "Just trying to keep them out of trouble. Figured they deserve better than what I had growing up." The sincerity in Travis's voice struck a chord with Marcus. It was a reminder that even those who had strayed could find their way back, given the chance. He clapped Travis on the shoulder. "You're doing good work. Keep it up." As Marcus continued his walk, he stopped by Evelyn's diner, where the morning rush was in full swing. Evelyn greeted him with her usual warmth, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter before he even had to ask. "Busy morning?" Marcus asked, nodding toward the bustling tables. Evelyn laughed. "When isn't it? But I'll take busy over quiet any day. Means the town's alive." They chatted for a while, their conversation turning to the upcoming dedication ceremony for the town's rebuilt park. The ceremony was intended to honor the efforts of everyone who had helped Clearfield recover, but Marcus had insisted on keeping his own contributions low-key. "You know you can't hide forever, right?" Evelyn teased. "People here look up to you. They're going to want to thank you." Marcus smiled faintly. "I don't need a spotlight. Seeing this town come back to life is thanks enough." Evelyn shook her head but let the matter drop, knowing Marcus well enough to understand his aversion to public praise. The dedication ceremony arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, the park adorned with ribbons and flowers. Townsfolk gathered in high spirits, their laughter and chatter filling the air. As the mayor took the stage to deliver a speech, Marcus stood at the back of the crowd, content to watch from a distance. The mayor spoke about the town's journey, the hardships they had faced, and the unity that had brought them through. Then, to Marcus's dismay, the mayor turned his attention to him. "And finally," the mayor said, gesturing toward Marcus, "we owe a special thanks to Marcus Cruz, whose bravery and leadership have been instrumental in Clearfield's recovery. Marcus, come on up here." The crowd erupted in applause, and despite his reluctance, Marcus found himself ushered to the stage. Standing before the crowd, he cleared his throat, searching for the right words. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, earning a few chuckles. "But I just want to say that everything we've accomplished here, it wasn't because of one person. It was because of all of you. This town came together in a way that's rare and powerful, and I'm proud to be a part of it." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, and as Marcus stepped down from the stage, he felt a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't expected. In the days that followed, Marcus noticed a shift in his own perspective. The gratitude of the townsfolk, the progress they had made, and the connections he had formed all pointed to a legacy he hadn't planned but deeply valued. One evening, as Marcus walked to the edge of town, he found Brock repairing a section of fencing near the school. The former gang leader had become a fixture in the community, his efforts to make amends earning him a cautious respect. "You're out late," Marcus said, approaching him. Brock glanced up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Could say the same about you." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air. Finally, Brock spoke. "You think people can really change?" Marcus met his gaze. "I think it's hard. But yeah, I do. You're proof of that." Brock nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe. Just trying to do right by this place. Make up for what I did." "You're doing more than you realize," Marcus said, "and that matters." As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself mentoring some of the younger townsfolk, teaching them skills he had honed during his time in the military: discipline, teamwork, and resilience. It was a way to give back, to ensure that the values he held dear would live on in Clearfield. One afternoon, as he watched a group of teens successfully complete a team-building exercise he had devised, Marcus felt a quiet pride. These were the seeds of a legacy, not in monuments or medals, but in the people he had helped to grow stronger. The realization brought him a sense of peace. Marcus Cruz, the soldier who had once fought for survival, had become a builder of community and a protector of hope. And for the first time, he felt that his legacy would be one worth leaving behind. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus found himself standing on the hill overlooking Clearfield. The town shimmered in the evening light, its heartbeats reflected in the laughter and warmth of its people. This was more than a home. It was a testament to resilience, to healing, and to the belief that even the most scarred among them could find purpose. Marcus smiled, knowing he had found his place among them. Clearfield had come a long way from the days of fear and chaos that had once gripped its streets. The scars of the past were still visible, but they no longer defined the town or its people. As Marcus Cruz walked through the bustling market square, he marveled at the resilience and strength of the community he had grown to call home. Vendors called out to customers, children ran through the square laughing, and a sense of hope permeated the air. It was a stark contrast to the quiet, uncertain town Marcus had first arrived in. He stopped by Evelyn's diner, where the smell of fresh coffee and pastries greeted him like an old friend. "Morning, Marcus," Evelyn said with a warm smile as she wiped down the counter. "The usual." Marcus nodded, taking his seat by the window. "You know me too well." As Evelyn prepared his coffee, Caleb walked in, his hands stained with grease and his expression bright. "Morning, folks. Guess what? That old tractor finally started up again. Took some elbow grease, but we got it running." Evelyn chuckled. "I'll believe it when I see it." Marcus smiled, enjoying the easy camaraderie. It was moments like these that reminded him of why he had stayed in Clearfield. This town, with all its quirks and challenges, had given him a purpose beyond the battlefield. As the day went on, Marcus made his rounds, checking in on various projects around town. The school's new playground was nearing completion, thanks to the combined efforts of Brock and a team of volunteers. Watching Brock work alongside townsfolk who had once feared him was a testament to the power of redemption. "Looking good," Marcus said as he approached Brock, who was tightening bolts on the swing set. Brock glanced up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Not bad, huh? Never thought I'd be building swing sets." Marcus chuckled. "Life's full of surprises." Brock nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You know, it's not just about making things right. It's about proving to myself that I can be better." "You're doing that every day," Marcus replied, "and people are noticing." The conversation left Marcus with a sense of pride, not just in Brock, but in the town's ability to embrace change and growth. It was a reminder that even the darkest chapters could lead to new beginnings. Later that evening, a town meeting was held at the community center to discuss future projects and plans. Marcus sat in the back, content to listen as various residents shared their ideas. Evelyn proposed hosting a summer festival, while Caleb suggested expanding the community garden. Lena, ever practical, brought up the need for improved road maintenance. As the discussion continued, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Lena, a rare smile gracing her face. "Got a minute?" she asked. "Of course," Marcus replied, following her outside. They stood on the steps of the community center, the cool night air filled with the hum of cicadas. Lena leaned against the railing, her gaze thoughtful. "You've done a lot for this town," she began. "But have you thought about what's next for you?" Marcus hesitated, the question catching him off guard. "I'm not sure. Clearfield feels like home now. I guess I'm still figuring it out." Lena nodded. "Well, whatever you decide, just know this town wouldn't be the same without you." Her words lingered with Marcus as he walked home that night. The idea of a future beyond the battles he had fought, the challenges he had faced, and the scars he carried was both daunting and exciting. Clearfield had given him a chance to start over, but it had also shown him the value of roots, of community, and of purpose. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began to explore new possibilities. He worked with the local school to start a mentorship program for at-risk youth, drawing on his military training to teach discipline and teamwork. He also partnered with Lena to organize self-defense workshops, empowering the townsfolk to protect themselves and their community. The initiatives were met with enthusiasm, further cementing Marcus's place in Clearfield. But beyond the tangible projects, it was the connections he had formed that mattered most: the friendships, the trust, and the shared sense of belonging. One afternoon, Marcus joined Caleb at the garage where they worked together to restore an old pickup truck that had been abandoned for years. As they tinkered with the engine, Caleb looked over at Marcus and said, "You know, this town owes you a lot more than you realize." Marcus shook his head. "The town saved itself. I just helped steer it in the right direction." "Don't sell yourself short," Caleb replied. "You gave us hope when we needed it most. That's something none of us will forget." The conversation stayed with Marcus as the sun dipped below the horizon. That evening, he found himself standing on the same hill he had visited so many times before. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Evelyn, Lena, Caleb, and even Brock had joined him, each bringing their own stories and experiences to the moment. "To new beginnings," Evelyn said, raising a glass. "To second chances," Brock added. "To Clearfield," Marcus said, his voice steady and full of gratitude. As they stood together, watching the lights of the town twinkle below, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years he felt ready to face it, not as a soldier, but as a man who had found his place in the world. Clearfield had been a battleground, a refuge, and ultimately a home. And for Marcus it was the start of something new, a legacy of hope, resilience, and renewal. The golden hues of early morning light filtered through the windows of Marcus Cruz's home. The day carried an unusual stillness, a sense of something ending but also beginning anew. Marcus sipped his coffee, staring out at the quiet streets of Clearfield. Today wasn't just another day. It marked a turning point, one that had been building for months. The town had come alive with preparations for a celebration, a day to honor not just the progress Clearfield had made, but the people who had made it possible. Marcus, ever modest, had tried to downplay his role, but the townsfolk had insisted. This wasn't just about the town's recovery. It was about the lessons they had all learned along the way. As Marcus walked to the town square, he passed familiar faces. Evelyn waved from the diner, her apron dusted with flour from the morning's baking. Caleb was already busy fixing the sign on his garage, shouting a cheerful, "Morning, Marcus," as he balanced on a ladder. Even Brock, who was setting up chairs for the event, gave him a nod of acknowledgement. The square was abuzz with activity. Booths lined the perimeter, offering everything from homemade pies to crafts made by the local kids. A small stage had been set up at the center, adorned with flowers and a banner that read, "To new beginnings and lasting lessons." Marcus took it all in, his heart swelling with pride. This was the Clearfield he had fought for, not just a place but a community, resilient and united. As the festivities began, speeches were made by the mayor, Evelyn, and others who had played pivotal roles in the town's transformation. Then, to Marcus's surprise, the mayor called him to the stage. Reluctantly, Marcus made his way to the podium. He cleared his throat, the weight of the moment settling over him. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, earning a ripple of laughter. "But today isn't about me. It's about us, about what we've built together." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the crowd. "When I first came to Clearfield, I didn't know what I was looking for. I'd spent years fighting battles, both on the battlefield and within myself. I thought I was just passing through. But this town, it showed me something I didn't expect. It showed me the strength of community, the power of second chances, and the importance of believing in something bigger than yourself." Marcus took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "The lesson I've learned here is one I hope we all carry forward. No matter how broken things seem, there's always a way to rebuild. Together, we've proven that. And together, we'll keep moving forward. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the square. Marcus stepped down from the stage, his heart full, as people approached to shake his hand, thank him, and share their own stories of hope and growth. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Marcus found himself on the hill overlooking the town. The lights of Clearfield shimmered like stars, and the laughter from the square drifted up to where he stood. He wasn't alone this time. Evelyn, Lena, Caleb, and Brock had joined him, their presence a reminder of the bonds they had forged. "To lessons learned," Lena said, raising her glass. "And to the ones still to come," Marcus replied, his voice steady. As they stood together, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace. The battles he had fought, both external and internal, had led him here. Clearfield wasn't just a chapter in his story. It was the story, a testament to resilience, redemption, and the enduring strength of community. The next day, as the town returned to its usual rhythm, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He spent the morning at the school, helping the children with a small project, building birdhouses to hang around the park. The activity was simple, but the joy it brought reminded him of the importance of nurturing the next generation. One of the children, a boy named Jake, tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Mr. Cruz, are you going to stay in Clearfield forever?" Marcus knelt down to meet the boy's curious gaze. "I don't know about forever," he said, "but for now, this is home." Jake grinned, satisfied with the answer, and ran off to join his friends. Watching them, Marcus felt a sense of fulfillment that no battlefield victory could ever match. Clearfield wasn't just a place. It was a testament to the power of resilience, community, and the lessons they had all learned together. The battles of his past had shaped him, but they no longer defined him. Clearfield had given him a new purpose, a new family, and a legacy he could be proud of. The final lesson Marcus Cruz had learned was one he would carry with him forever. No matter how broken the world might seem, there is always a way to rebuild. And sometimes the greatest battles are fought and won, not with weapons, but with hope,